close your eyes or don't. Either way, settle in, because tonight we are going to Springfield. Not the Springfield you think you know, not the one with the cheerful opening credits and the couch gag and the familiar brass melody that you could probably hum in your sleep. We are going to a different version of that town, the version that lives underneath the jokes. The one that shows up when you watch the show slowly, quietly, in the dark, and start paying attention to the things that nobody in the show ever bothers to explain. The Simpsons has been on television since the 17th of December, 1989. That is not a small amount of time. That is longer than most streaming services have existed. Longer than the internet has been a household fixture. Longer than a generation of children who were born, grew up, finished school, built careers, and had children of their own, and through all of it, through every single year that passed in the real world, Springfield stayed exactly the same. Bart is still 10 years old. Lisa is still 8. The power plant is still running. Homer is still somehow employed. And the entire town, every single resident who has ever appeared on screen in over 3 decades of television, is still yellow. That last part is what we are starting with tonight, because it is, in a very quiet and persistent way, the strangest thing about this show. The yellow skin. Nobody in Springfield has ever mentioned it. In 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, not a single character has looked at their own hands, or at their neighbor, or at their reflection in a window on a rainy Springfield afternoon, and said anything about the fact that every person in this town has the same impossible skin tone. Not pale, not olive, not any shade that exists in the real spectrum of human pigmentation. Yellow. A warm, uniform, cartoon yellow that the show applies to every Springfield resident with the same casual consistency that it applies to the sky being blue or grass being green. It is simply the way things are in Springfield, and the show has decided, from the very first episode to the most recent one, that this does not require an explanation. But here is the thing about that decision. It is strange in a way that most viewers have simply learned to stop noticing. And part of what makes Falling Asleep to Springfield so interesting is that when you let the stories wash over you without the pressure of trying to follow every joke, these quiet impossibilities start rising to the surface. They drift up slowly, like something coming loose from the bottom of a very still lake. The yellow skin is one of them. Let us think about it gently, the way you think about things when you are not quite asleep but not quite awake either. In the real world, human skin color comes from melanin. The variation across different populations is remarkable and beautiful, but it exists within a range. Nobody is yellow in the way Springfield residents are yellow. Jaundice can cause a yellow tint, but jaundice is a symptom of liver failure, and you cannot sustain a population of jaundiced people across multiple generations without somebody noticing that something is very wrong. The yellow in Springfield is not jaundice. It is something else entirely. It is the yellow of lemons and school buses and certain flowers, applied to human beings as if it is completely unremarkable, and it covers everyone. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, their neighbors, their teachers, the mayor, the police chief, every background pedestrian who has ever shuffled through a Springfield crosswalk in the history of the show. The only people who are not yellow are the guest characters, the celebrities and the famous faces who drift through Springfield's world for a single episode and then disappear. When those people appear on screen, they are drawn differently. Their skin tones reflect something closer to their real-world appearance. Their proportions are slightly more natural. And then the episode ends, the guest leaves town, and Springfield goes back to being entirely, uniformly yellow. The show has never addressed this. The writers, when asked, tend to land on the same explanation. It is an artistic choice. Matt Groening wanted characters who would be instantly recognizable, even on a small screen from across a room, and the yellow skin, combined with the distinctive hair shapes, accomplished that goal. From a production standpoint, this makes complete sense. It is a smart design decision. When you see that yellow, you know exactly what you are watching. But within the world of the show itself, within the logic of Springfield as a place where things happen and people live, and the sky is the same sky as the one outside your window, the yellow skin is never explained. And the more time you spend in that quiet space between waking and sleeping, the more that unexplained detail grows into something that feels almost like a question pressing gently at the edge of your consciousness. Why is everyone yellow? The fan theories have answers, and they are worth letting wash over you on a slow, sleepy evening, because they are the kind of theories that make you see a show you have watched your entire life in a completely different light. The most persistent one connects the yellow skin to the nuclear power plant. Springfield's power plant has been established, through dozens of episodes spread across decades of storytelling, as one of the most aggressively unsafe industrial facilities ever depicted in fiction. The violations are not minor. Radioactive material has been found in places it should never be. The cooling towers have been patched with materials that no engineer would ever approve. The waterways near the plant have shown evidence of contamination so severe that the wildlife in them has been visibly, measurably altered. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. That is a fact established in the show's 2nd season, presented as a major plot point, treated as national news within Springfield's own universe, and then quietly filed away and never fully revisited. A 3-eyed fish was pulled from a river near the power plant. A gubernatorial campaign used this fish as evidence that something was very wrong with the environment around that facility, and then the fish was eaten on live television to prove it was harmless, and Springfield moved on. But Blinky did not stop existing just because Springfield moved on. The mutations that produced Blinky did not reverse themselves because nobody wanted to think about them anymore. And if the water near the power plant was producing 3-eyed fish in Season 2, then what was that same water doing to the people who lived downstream? What was it doing to the people whose homes and schools and parks and drinking water supplies sat within the same contamination radius as that river? The yellow skin theory suggests something simple and, if you let it, a little sad. Springfield's residents are yellow because they have been living in the shadow of a leaking nuclear facility for longer than most of them have been alive. The radiation has changed them at a level so fundamental that it is reflected in their appearance, and because it has been happening gradually, over generations, across the entire town simultaneously, nobody notices because nobody has anything to compare themselves to. When every person you have ever met looks the same way you do, the way you look is simply what people look like. There is something almost gentle about that idea, even as it implies something troubling underneath. The people of Springfield are not alarmed by their own appearance because they genuinely do not know that there is anything unusual about it. They have been yellow their whole lives. Their parents were yellow. Their children are yellow. The fish in the river have 3 eyes, which is admittedly strange, but the people just look like people, and it has always been this way, so it must simply be the way things are. This is, of course, the psychological mechanism at the heart of a great deal of what makes Springfield such a strange and fascinating place. The town has an extraordinary capacity for normalizing things that should not be normal. Not through active denial, necessarily, not always through a conscious decision to look away, but through the quieter and more pervasive process of simply never having been taught to see the thing that needs to be looked at. If you grow up in a place where a certain condition is universal, you do not have the cognitive framework to identify it as a condition. It is just life. It is just what people are. Let the yellow skin settle into the background of your thoughts now, the way it has always been in the background of the show. Let it sit there, warm and unexplained, while we move gently into the next question. Because the yellow skin is only the beginning, it is the most visible plot hole in the show, which is perhaps why it has been dismissed so easily. It is too obvious to be suspicious. It is just how the Simpsons look. Everyone knows that. Everyone accepts it. And acceptance is a powerful thing in Springfield. It is practically the town's primary civic virtue. But there are other things to notice, softer things. The kind of details that drift into focus when you are not looking directly at them. Consider for a moment the teeth. Almost every character in Springfield has a set of teeth that, in the real world, would require years of orthodontic work to produce. The overbite that Homer and several other characters share is pronounced enough that a real dentist would consider it a significant structural issue. Lisa, who is arguably the most health-conscious and intellectually engaged member of her family, has never once seemed concerned about the fact that her father's dental situation should, by any reasonable medical assessment, be causing him daily discomfort and probably affecting his ability to chew properly. This is not a complaint. It is not even really a criticism. It is simply one of those details that you notice when you are watching Springfield slowly, in the low light of a late evening, when the show is washing over you the way background noise does when you are drifting towards sleep. The teeth, like the yellow skin, like the 4 fingers, like the hair physics that defy everything we know about hair, are simply part of the visual language of Springfield. They are accepted. They go unremarked. and they accumulate, detail by detail, into a portrait of a town that looks like our world and sounds like our world, but operates by a set of rules that are ever so slightly different from the ones we live under. 4 fingers on each hand. That is another one. Every Springfield resident has 4 fingers and a thumb, which is to say, 4 fingers, because the thumb is not conventionally counted as a finger, which leaves every Springfield resident with a total of 8 fingers. This is extremely common in animation. It is easier and less expensive to animate a 4-fingered hand than a 5-fingered one. And audiences have accepted this convention so thoroughly that most viewers stop noticing it within the first few minutes of watching any animated show that uses it. But within the internal logic of Springfield, the 4-fingered hand is another unanswered question. It is another detail that the residents of the town never address, never mention, never find strange. Homer has shaken hands with characters from outside Springfield who have 5 fingers. No one has ever commented on the difference. What is interesting about all of these things, the yellow skin, the teeth, the fingers, the hair, is not that they exist. Cartoons are full of visual conventions that deviate from real-world anatomy. What is interesting is the way the show has, over 36 years, developed enough internal consistency and enough emotional depth that these conventions stop feeling like artistic shortcuts and start feeling like something else. They feel like the surface of a world that has its own logic, its own history, its own set of quiet mysteries that have never been fully solved. And when you let yourself drift into Springfield on a quiet evening, not watching with the sharp, focused attention of someone trying to catch every joke, but simply letting the stories and the images and the voices wash over you the way water washes over stones, that is when you start to feel the weight of all those unanswered questions. They are not heavy. They are soft. They are the kind of questions that do not demand answers so much as they invite you to simply sit with them, to let them be part of the texture of the experience. Why is everyone yellow? Why does nobody age? Why does the power plant keep running? And why does nobody seem to find that troubling? These questions have no answers within the show. They never will. And that is part of what makes Springfield so enduring, so dreamlike, so perfectly suited for the long, slow hours between wakefulness and sleep. It is a world that operates on feeling rather than logic, on repetition rather than consequence, on the warm, familiar rhythm of a family that is always there, always together, always in the same house on the same street, with the same problems and the same love, and the same inability to fully understand what is happening around them. The yellow skin is the door, but Springfield is the room. And we are just getting started. Let us stay with the visual impossibilities a little longer before we move on, because there are more of them, and they are worth the time. The Simpsons family's house on Evergreen Terrace is a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home. This has been established clearly within the show. Bart has a room, Lisa has a room, Homer and Marge share the master bedroom, and Maggie occupies a crib that seems to float between those spaces depending on what the episode requires. There is a kitchen, a living room, and a basement that the show uses for various purposes across different episodes. It is, by all external appearances, a standard American residential house of modest proportions. This house also somehow accommodates, when the plot requires it, an almost unlimited number of guests. Extended family members, sometimes several at once. Strangers who need somewhere to stay. Characters who are introduced as long-term house guests and who occupy the space without anyone seeming to find the square footage insufficient. The house expands and contracts according to the needs of the story, and nobody in Springfield finds this unusual because nobody in Springfield tracks the relationship between narrative requirements and spatial reality with any particular vigilance. There is also the matter of the house's exterior versus its interior. The exterior of the Simpsons house, as it has been depicted across decades of establishing shots and exterior views, is a specific size and configuration. The interior, as depicted across the same decades, does not consistently correspond to what that exterior would contain. Rooms are larger than they should be. Distances between spaces are longer than the building's footprint would allow. The basement in particular is depicted on some occasions as a modest storage space and on others as something that seems significantly more capacious than the structure above it should be able to conceal. This is, again, a production convention rather than a deliberate story choice. The show depicts interior spaces at whatever scale the scene requires, without constant reference to the building's established exterior dimensions. But the accumulation of these small spatial inconsistencies adds to the impression of Springfield as a place where the physical world is slightly more flexible than it would be in a location with fixed coordinates and normal physics. The living room couch, famously, is the site of the show's longest-running visual gag. Every episode's opening sequence concludes with the family racing to the couch and landing in some impossible configuration, or finding the couch in some altered state, or arriving to discover that something completely unexpected is sharing their television space with them. The couch gag is explicitly absurdist. It does not pretend to be part of the show's reality. It is a meta-joke, a piece of deliberate impossibility inserted before the episode begins, serving as a kind of disclaimer about the relationship between this show and the laws of physics. The couch gag, in its own way, is honest about something that the rest of the show is more subtle about. The impossibilities in Springfield are not incidental. They are part of the experience. They are baked into the opening sequence, announced before the story even begins. The couch will do something impossible. You will watch it. You will accept it. And then the episode will begin, and the more subtle impossibilities will accumulate in the background, and by the end you will have forgotten that any of it was impossible at all. That is Springfield's most sophisticated trick. It tells you up front that physics do not quite apply here, and then it spends the rest of the episode doing something much more interesting than breaking physics. It tells you a story about people, about a family, about love and failure and the particular texture of ordinary life, made extraordinary by proximity and time. And the impossibilities become the wallpaper present, structural, part of the environment, but not what you are actually looking at when you look at the show. What you are looking at is the family. That is always what you are looking at. Even when Springfield's mysteries are at their most elaborate, even when the plot holes are at their most visible, what keeps the whole thing together and meaningful is the warmth at its center. Homer loves Marge. Marge loves Homer. The kids love their parents and each other in the complicated, imperfect, completely genuine way that family love operates. This is the anchor. This is why you keep coming back. The yellow skin is the mystery. The love is the answer. The two coexist in Springfield without difficulty, the way mystery and warmth coexist in the best kinds of stories. Let all of it drift around you now, soft and familiar and full of things that have never been explained. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. There is something quietly wonderful about knowing that someone in a different time zone is also drifting off to the mysteries of Springfield tonight, thinking about yellow skin and three-eyed fish and the particular impossible warmth of a family that has been there every week for 36 years. And if this kind of slow, curious storytelling is what you come here for, subscribing means you will never have to search for it again. It will just be there, waiting for you. Now, let us go a little deeper into Springfield. The yellow skin raises a question, and the question opens into a larger landscape, because Springfield is not just a town with unusual residents. It is a town with a very particular relationship to the concept of explanation. Things happen in Springfield and they are not explained. Not because the writers are being lazy. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically included some of the most highly educated people ever to work in television comedy, but because Springfield has been constructed, whether intentionally or through the accumulated weight of 3 decades of storytelling, as a place that does not offer explanations. It offers episodes. It offers jokes. It offers the warm, familiar comfort of a family that loves each other in a chaotic and imperfect way. But explanations? Continuity? The kind of internal logical consistency that would allow you to construct a complete and coherent picture of how Springfield works? Those things are not really on offer. And that gap, the space between what the show shows you and what it never bothers to explain, is where the plot holes live. They are not exactly holes in the conventional sense. They are more like windows, openings in the fabric of the show through which you can see something that the show was never quite designed to let you see. The machinery behind the warmth, the questions underneath the jokes, the strange, quiet impossibilities that have been accumulating since 1989 and show no sign of resolving themselves before the show eventually, inevitably, finally ends. The yellow skin is the first window. There is a particular kind of person who is very easy to love and very difficult to understand. And Homer Simpson is perhaps the most perfect fictional example of that person who has ever been put on screen. He is warm and impulsive and childlike in a way that is often endearing and occasionally catastrophic. He loves his family with a depth and sincerity that the show makes clear repeatedly, even when the plots he is involved in are too absurd to take seriously. He is, in almost every way, a man whose heart is in the right place and whose brain is somewhere significantly further away. But Homer's brain is not just inattentive. It is not just slow. Homer's brain has a relationship with memory that, when you examine it slowly and carefully across the full run of the show, turns out to be one of the most consistent and quietly baffling plot holes in 36 years of television. Homer Simpson cannot remember things. This is established as a character trait from the very beginning, and it is played for comedy constantly throughout the show's run. He forgets names, faces, events, skills, and occasionally entire years. He meets people who have clearly been significant figures in his life and has no memory of them at all. He learns lessons in one episode and has no trace of those lessons in the next. He acquires skills in one storyline, sometimes remarkable skills. Skills that take real human beings years of dedicated practice to develop, and those skills simply do not exist in the following episode. This is, of course, a standard feature of episodic television. Characters do not carry everything they learn and experience from one episode to the next, because episodic storytelling is designed so that each episode can function as a relatively self-contained experience. You do not need to have seen the episode where Homer became a professional boxer to enjoy the episode where Homer builds a barbecue pit. The show is designed this way on purpose. It is a creative choice, not an oversight. But Homer's amnesia goes so far, covers so much territory, and has been depicted so directly and so specifically within the show's own storytelling that it stops feeling like a production convention and starts feeling like something the show is actually trying to tell you about its central character. The forgetting is too complete. The resets are too total. And some of what Homer forgets is so significant, so life-altering, so fundamentally important to who he is and how he understands himself that the forgetting itself becomes the mystery. Let us start with the skills, because they are the easiest to track and the most quietly astonishing when you line them up. Homer has, across the run of the show, become a professional chef, a food critic, an astronaut, a truck driver capable of extraordinary feats of driving skill, a musician of genuine ability, a deep-sea fisherman, a competitive bowler, a professional wrestler, a bodyguard, a country music songwriter, a polar explorer, a sugar magnate, a newspaper columnist, a film producer, a voice actor, a sanitation commissioner, a mayoral candidate, a grease recycling entrepreneur, a missionary, a carny, a diamond thief, a police officer, a firefighter, a licensed minister, a hair transplant entrepreneur, a nudist, a military officer, a member of a secret society, and, on one memorable occasion, the king of the gypsies. Most of these roles required skills that Homer simply did not have at the start of the episode in question. He learned them, or discovered that he had them, or stumbled into situations that revealed them, and by the end of the episode he was operating at a level of competency that the episode treated as impressive and real. And then the next episode would begin, and none of it would be there. The chef would be gone, the astronaut training would be gone, the bowling championship form would be gone, Homer would be Homer lovable, impulsive, poorly coordinated, largely unskilled again, as if none of it had happened. Now, a generous reading of this pattern is that Homer is simply being portrayed through the lens of episodic comedy, where continuity is less important than the story being told in a given week. And this is probably the correct reading, in the sense that it is almost certainly what the writers intend. But there is another reading, one that sits quietly alongside the straightforward one and does not compete with it so much as it enriches it. What if Homer's forgetting is not just a production convenience? What if, within the world of the show, Homer Simpson genuinely cannot retain the things that happen to him? What if the resets are not just a feature of episodic storytelling, but a reflection of something in Homer's actual neurology? The show has given us direct evidence that Homer's brain does not function the way a typical human brain does. There is the famous revelation about the crayon, an extraordinary piece of storytelling buried inside what seems at first like a throwaway premise, in which it is discovered that Homer has had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood. The crayon physically impedes his cognitive function. When it is removed, Homer's IQ rises dramatically. He becomes a different person, thoughtful, articulate, capable of complex reasoning and emotional intelligence that his normal self rarely demonstrates. The episode follows this elevated version of Homer for long enough to make the audience care about who he could be, and then ends with Homer choosing to have the crayon reinserted. He chooses the fog. He chooses the simpler, softer version of his own mind over the painful clarity of full cognitive function. That is the obvious moving part of the story. But the part that lingers, the part that is a little harder to shake, is the question of how that crayon got there. A crayon, lodged in a child's nasal passage, working its way into the brain. This is not something that goes undetected through a normal childhood. Children receive medical attention. They visit doctors. They get checked. And yet Homer, who grew up in Springfield, who presumably visited Springfield doctors, who had an adult life in Springfield during which he received medical care for various emergencies and accidents, never had this crayon discovered until well into his adult life. There are two possible explanations. One is that the Springfield medical establishment is extraordinarily incompetent, which the show has provided some evidence for. The other is that someone knew about the crayon and chose not to remove it. That the crayon's presence and the cognitive limitation it produced was, at some level, considered acceptable or even desirable by someone with access to Homer's medical history and the authority to act on it. The show does not commit to either explanation. It raises the question and moves on, the way Springfield moves on from most things. But the question remains, soft and persistent, the kind of thing you find yourself thinking about in the slow, quiet space before sleep. Homer's memory problem is not just about skills and jobs. It extends into his personal relationships, his history, and his understanding of his own life in ways that become genuinely moving when you look at them with care. He has encountered his biological mother, the character of Mona Simpson, and her presence in his life, the revelation that she is alive, the joy and the grief of reconnecting with her. The pain of losing her again represents some of the most emotionally significant storytelling the show has ever done. Mona's story is heartbreaking in the specific way that only The Simpsons can achieve, where genuine emotional depth coexists with cartoon absurdity, and somehow the combination produces something more affecting than either element could on its own. Homer's reunion with his mother is one of those moments. And yet, Homer's relationship to his own grief over his mother's absence, the grief he carries because he believed, for most of his childhood and young adulthood, that she was dead, is something the show can only really return to occasionally because Homer does not have the consistent emotional continuity required to carry a wound across decades of storytelling. He grieves when the story requires him to grieve. He remembers when the story requires him to remember. And between those moments, the grief is simply not present in his day-to-day experience of being Homer, because Homer's day-to-day experience is perpetually, relentlessly present tense. He lives in the now. Every episode is now. Every experience is happening for the first time, or close to it. The past does not accumulate for Homer the way it does for real human beings, who carry their histories with them wherever they go, who feel the weight of old choices and old losses even on perfectly ordinary days when nothing particularly consequential is happening. This is, in a sense, the defining feature of Homer Simpson as a character. He is the most present person in Springfield. He is never burdened by yesterday, because yesterday does not really exist for him in any meaningful way. He is perpetually experiencing his life as if it is new. And while this is obviously a function of episodic storytelling, the writers need Homer to be usable in a wide variety of situations without being constrained by the baggage of every previous story it creates. Across the span of the whole show, a portrait of a man whose relationship to his own history is unlike anything else on television. Consider the number of near-death experiences Homer has survived. Not the cartoon physics kind, where he falls off something tall and bounces at the bottom. Those are so common they barely register. The more significant kind, the ones where Homer is in genuine danger, where the show takes a moment to establish the stakes, where the family rallies around him or the episode builds toward the question of whether he will make it through. Homer has survived car accidents that should have been fatal. He has survived industrial accidents at the power plant. He has survived falls, explosions, electrocutions, animal attacks, severe hypothermia, severe dehydration, a collapsed mine, and an incident involving a vending machine that put him in an actual medically significant coma. The coma is worth dwelling on for a moment, because it is the kind of story beat that should leave a mark. A real human being who went into a coma and woke up would carry that experience. It would be part of how they understood their own fragility, their own mortality, the relationship between their body and their continued existence in the world. It would change them, not necessarily dramatically, not necessarily in ways that other people could easily see, but in the quiet interior ways that shape how a person moves through their life. Homer woke up from the coma and strangled Bart, and the episode ended and everything went back to normal. This is not a criticism of the storytelling. The Simpsons is a comedy, and the comedic rhythm of the show requires exactly this kind of reset. The coma episode is funny, and its ending is funny. And the show does not pretend to be the kind of drama where comas leave lasting marks. But when you lay the whole run of the show out in your mind and look at the accumulated weight of everything Homer has been through, every accident, every loss, every job, every adventure, every moment of genuine emotional consequence, and then look at how little of it seems to have changed him, the effect is strange and quietly fascinating. He is the same Homer at the end of 36 years that he was at the beginning. A little more culturally fluent, perhaps. A little more aware of the world beyond Springfield, having been to so many parts of it. But fundamentally, essentially, at the level of who he is and how he experiences being alive the same. The man who can survive anything and forget everything. The man for whom every day is effectively the first day, because the days do not really stack up for Homer the way they do for the people around him. There is something almost peaceful about that, if you look at it from a certain angle. And that is the angle worth finding when you are settling in for a long, slow drift through Springfield's mysteries. Homer's forgetting is not a tragedy within the show's emotional register. It is a feature. It is what allows Homer to be Homer, perpetually surprised by life, perpetually enthusiastic about whatever is happening right now, perpetually unencumbered by the mistakes and losses that a more retentive person would be unable to shake. He is, in some deep way, the freest person in Springfield. Not because his life is without difficulty or pain, but because the difficulty and the pain do not follow him from one chapter to the next. He sets them down, not through any effort of will, not through the hard work of forgiveness or the discipline of emotional processing, but simply because that is how his mind works. The episodes end and Homer begins again, and the beginning is always a little bit wonderful for him, even when the circumstances do not quite warrant wonder. There is a plot hole here, a real one, in the sense that a man who has lived Homer's life, who has had his experiences, survived his accidents, met his people, learned his skills should not be able to simply reset between chapters. Real life does not work that way. But the plot hole is also a kind of gift, because it means that Homer is always available to be delighted. He is always capable of encountering the world with something approaching freshness. And in a show that has been running for 36 years, in a town where nothing ever really changes and time does not pass, and the same family sits down on the same couch every week, that perpetual freshness is not just a convenience. It is the engine that keeps everything moving. Homer forgets, because forgetting is what Springfield requires. The town runs on a kind of collective amnesia, a shared decision not to carry forward the things that would make continued life in this particular place very difficult to justify. And Homer, who is in so many ways the most Springfield of all Springfield residents, forgets more completely and more consistently than anyone else. He is the purest expression of the town's relationship to its own history, which is to say, warm and impulsive, and always a little bit surprised, and utterly, completely unburdened by yesterday. Let the forgetting wash over you now. There is something restful about it, actually. The idea that a person could simply begin again, episode after episode, day after day, without the accumulated weight of everything that came before. Most of us carry our histories everywhere. Homer gets to put his down. Springfield is very good at putting things down. The question of what gets picked back up, and when, and by whom, that is where the real mysteries live. We are moving slowly through them one by one in the long, soft hours of the evening. There is no rush. Springfield will be here when you get there. It always is. Somewhere in America, there is a town called Springfield. In fact, there are many towns called Springfield. It is one of the most common city names in the United States. There are Springfields in Illinois, in Oregon, in Massachusetts, in Missouri, in Tennessee, in Ohio, and in a dozen other states besides. When Matt Groening was choosing a name for the fictional home of his fictional family, he chose Springfield precisely because of this ubiquity. He wanted a name that could belong anywhere, that could feel familiar to viewers regardless of where they lived, that would suggest a place without specifying one. This was a smart decision. It was also the beginning of one of the most elaborate, most sustained, and most quietly strange geographical mysteries in the history of American television. Because Springfield, the Springfield of The Simpsons, the one on the edge of a gorge and beside a harbor and near a mountain range, and within driving distance of at least 4 different state borders, does not exist anywhere. And it does not exist anywhere because it has been specifically, deliberately, and with considerable creative effort constructed to exist everywhere at once. The geography of Springfield is not inconsistent because the writers were careless. It is inconsistent because the writers were, in this particular area, playing a very long and very patient game with the audience. Here is what we know about Springfield's physical location. And I want you to notice, as I describe it, how quickly the picture becomes impossible. Springfield has a harbor. Several episodes have established that the town sits on or very near a body of water large enough to accommodate commercial shipping traffic. The harbor has been used in plots involving boats, smuggling, and at least one whale-related incident. There is no ambiguity about this. Springfield is a coastal or near-coastal town with maritime infrastructure. Springfield also has mountains nearby. The Murderhorn, which Homer attempts to climb in a memorable episode, is within reasonable distance of the town. The Springfield Gorge, which Bart attempts to jump on his skateboard and which Homer subsequently falls into in rather more detail than anyone needed to see, is a feature of the local landscape that implies significant geological elevation changes in the immediate vicinity. Springfield has farmland. The agricultural landscape surrounding the town has been featured in multiple episodes, and the farming community is part of Springfield's social fabric. This implies a relatively flat, arable region, the kind of terrain you associate with the Midwest or the Plains states rather than coastal or mountainous areas. Springfield has a desert nearby. At minimum, the show has depicted desert terrain accessible from the town without suggesting that significant travel was required to reach it. Springfield has experienced weather patterns consistent with New England winters. It has also experienced weather patterns consistent with the deep American South. It has had snowstorms, heat waves, and at least one tornado warning. And Springfield, according to various episodes, borders the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, states that do not share borders with each other, and that together span essentially the entire geographic width of the continental United States. No real location in America has all of these features. No place is simultaneously coastal and mountainous and flatland and desert adjacent and neighbor to states on 4 different compass points. Springfield is not a real place pretending to be unspecified. Springfield is a geographic impossibility, and it has been one from the very beginning. The writers have had enormous fun with this over the years. Clues have been planted and then contradicted. Lisa's area code has been shown as 636. Which is a Missouri prefix. The state flag has been depicted and does not match any real state flag. The state abbreviation has appeared as NT, which corresponds to no actual American state. Homer has, in one episode, pointed to Springfield's location on a map and had his finger immediately obscured before the audience could see where he was pointing. The show has done this intentionally. The obscured finger is not a mistake. It is a joke about the joke. The creator himself, Matt Groening, eventually gave the game away in a 2012 interview. He confirmed that the name Springfield came from his memories of growing up near Springfield, Oregon. He said this in a Smithsonian Magazine interview, which is about as public a forum as you can get, and for approximately 48 hours, the internet treated this as the solution to one of television's longest-running mysteries. Then the show continued, and the contradictions continued, and Springfield remained exactly as geographically impossible as it had always been. The writers did not change their approach after Groening's confession. If anything, they seemed to enjoy the confession's uselessness, because the town's location continued to shift and contradict itself and refused to be pinned down. Oregon origin story notwithstanding. The mystery had been technically solved and practically unchanged. Springfield is from Oregon, and also Springfield is from everywhere, and also Springfield is from nowhere at all. What makes this particular plot hole interesting to sit with on a quiet evening is not the mystery itself, but what the mystery implies about the kind of place Springfield is. A town with a fixed location has a fixed set of relationships with the world around it. It is subject to the regulatory authority of a specific state. It is downstream of specific other communities and upstream of others. It has a specific climate, a specific landscape, specific neighboring towns with their own specific histories. It is part of a network of real places, connected to the world by geography the way a spider's web is connected to the branches it hangs from. A town with no fixed location has none of these things. It floats. It exists in a kind of geographic suspension, touching every part of America without being anchored to any of it. It can have mountains today and coastline tomorrow and desert next week, because its landscape is determined by the needs of the story being told rather than by any consistent physical reality. This is, in a very real sense, what makes Springfield feel so universally familiar. When you watch The Simpsons in a small town in Maine, the Springfield you see looks a little bit like where you live. When you watch it in a suburb of Los Angeles, or in a Midwestern city, or in a neighborhood in Texas, or Montana, or Florida, Springfield still looks a little bit like where you live. Not because it has been accurately designed to resemble any of those places, but because it has been designed to resemble all of them at once. It takes from everywhere and commits to nowhere. There is something almost poetic about this. When you let it drift through your thoughts slowly, Springfield is America's hometown. Not any specific American hometown, but the feeling of an American hometown, the particular texture of a place with a main street and a diner and a bar, and a school and a power plant on the edge of town, and a family at its center who love each other messily and incompletely and with complete sincerity. That feeling does not belong to any one geography. It belongs to the experience of growing up in America, wherever in America you grew up. But there is a darker reading too, and it comes up when you think about geography, not as a matter of feeling, but as a matter of accountability. A power plant has a location. A location means a jurisdiction. A jurisdiction means a regulatory authority, a state environmental protection agency, a federal inspection schedule, a specific set of laws that govern what can and cannot be discharged into the air and water of that particular place. If Springfield is in Ohio, then Ohio's EPA has jurisdiction over the nuclear facility that has been dumping radioactive material into Springfield's waterways. If Springfield is in Oregon, then Oregon's regulatory framework applies. Every state has different rules, different enforcement mechanisms, different histories with industrial regulation. If Springfield has no fixed location, then it has no fixed jurisdiction, no consistent regulatory authority, no permanent state attorney general whose job it is to monitor the power plant's safety record, no established legal relationship with any specific federal district. The plant operates in a zone of permanent ambiguity, where accountability is always technically possible but practically very difficult because the entity responsible for enforcing accountability would first have to establish which of the many Springfields it is dealing with. This is, of course, enormously useful for the one entity in Springfield that has the most to fear from regulatory attention. Charles Montgomery Burns, the owner and operator of the Springfield nuclear power plant, has spent decades maintaining a facility with 342 documented safety violations, while somehow avoiding the kind of decisive federal intervention that those violations would normally trigger. The plant continues to operate, the violations continue to accumulate, and the town continues to live with the consequences of both. A fixed location would make Burns more vulnerable. A town that can be found on a map is a town that can be investigated by a specific regulatory body with a specific mandate and a specific jurisdiction. A town that exists everywhere and nowhere is a town that is perpetually difficult to hold to account, because accountability requires specificity, and Springfield's defining characteristic is its refusal to be specific about where it is. This may be reading too much into a cartoon's geographical inconsistencies. The most straightforward explanation is still the most likely one. The show's writers deliberately keep Springfield's location vague because doing so makes the show more relatable to a wider audience. This is true. This is almost certainly the primary reason. But the secondary implications of that choice, the ways in which a geographically unanchored town is also an accountably unanchored town, are interesting enough to sit with on a slow evening. Springfield is everywhere. Springfield is nowhere. Springfield is whatever the story needs it to be. And whatever the story needs it to be, it is also, always, just a little bit familiar. A little bit like somewhere you have been. A little bit like a place you might know. That familiarity is the most remarkable thing about it. 36 years of contradictory geography, and Springfield still feels like home. There is also the question of Springfield's infrastructure, which is closely related to its geography but distinct enough to deserve its own gentle examination. Because while Springfield's location on a map is genuinely unclear, the town's internal physical layout has been depicted often enough that certain features are well established. The gorge is there, the harbor is there, the power plant with its distinctive cooling towers is visible from many parts of town and has been used as a landmark and reference point across hundreds of episodes. The elementary school, the nuclear plant, the police station, the hospital, the quick stop mart, the church, the bar, these are all fixed points in Springfield's internal geography, and their relationship to each other has been shown consistently enough that a careful viewer could construct a rough mental map of the central town. But the relationship of that central town to the landscape surrounding it, to the mountains and the desert and the forest and the coast, shifts episode to episode. Springfield has an internal consistency and an external inconsistency, which is to say that you could probably find your way from Homer's house to Moe's tavern, but could not tell you which direction to drive to reach the ocean. This is the geographic equivalent of a dream. In dreams, the rooms of your house are in the right places relative to each other, but the house itself might be somewhere completely different than where you live, and the neighborhood outside might look nothing like any neighborhood you have ever been in. The internal logic holds. The external context shifts. And none of this seems strange while you are inside the dream, because the feeling of the place is right, even when the geography is wrong. Springfield is a dreamed place. It has the feeling of a real American town without the obligation of being one. And when you are drifting off to sleep, when the boundary between waking and dreaming is at its softest and most permeable, that quality of Springfield is perhaps its most appealing one. It does not insist on being anywhere. It simply is, warm and familiar and impossible, exactly where you need it to be. Let the geography dissolve now, the way geography always dissolves in the last moments before sleep. Mountains, harbor, gorge, farmland, desert, all of it softening into the simple, warm feeling of a town that could be anywhere, which is another way of saying it could be home. We are moving on. There are more things to notice in Springfield, softer things, the kind of details that accumulate slowly and gently and only reveal their full strangeness when you see them all at once. We are getting there. Take your time. Springfield is a small town. The show has established this clearly enough. It has a single main street, a single nuclear plant, a single elementary school, a police force small enough that its ineffectiveness is a running joke rather than a genuine mystery. By the internal logic of the show, this is a community where everyone more or less knows everyone, where the same faces appear at the same places, with the kind of regularity that only happens in places small enough that you cannot avoid your neighbors even if you want to. And yet Springfield has an enormous population of side characters, recurring figures who appear in the background and the edges of episodes, who step forward occasionally to deliver a line or participate in a plot, and who have, across 36 years of storytelling, accumulated histories and situations that are, when you look at them carefully, completely and magnificently impossible. Let us move through some of them slowly tonight. Not with urgency, not with the sharp focus of someone trying to build a case, but with the gentle, curious attention of someone who has noticed something interesting and wants to spend a little time with it before sleep arrives. Apu Naha Sapi Mapetilon runs the Quick E-Mart. This is his primary role in the show, and it is the role he has occupied since the very first seasons. Apu is the person Springfield buys its convenience store goods from. He is behind the counter when Homer stops in for a donut, when Bart comes in looking for something his parents would prefer he not have, when various Springfield residents need the particular late-night or early morning convenience that only a place like the Quickie Mart provides. Apu is, in this sense, the most reliably present commercial presence in the entire town. Apu also has a doctorate. This has been established within the show. He holds an advanced degree from a university, awarded with academic honors, in a field that required significant intellectual investment. He is not, by any measure, a man without other options. He chose the Quick E-Mart. He has worked there, by the internal timeline of the show, for many years. He has been robbed, on his own account, more times than seems statistically plausible for a single retail location in a town the size of Springfield. He also, at a certain point in the show's run, became the father of octuplets, 8 children, born simultaneously, with all of the immediate logistical consequences that entails. And then the show moved on, as the show always does, and the octuplets became occasional background details rather than the central, consuming, life-altering fact that 8 simultaneous children would represent in any real family's experience. This is the standard Simpsons pattern, and Apu's octuplets are simply one of the clearest examples of it. The show introduces a major life change for a character, something that would, in reality, reorganize that character's entire existence, and then gently folds it into the background where it joins all the other major life changes that are technically still true, but not actively being dealt with. There is a kind of grace in this, actually. The show is not pretending the octuplets do not exist. It simply treats them the way Springfield treats most things, as part of the established furniture of the world, present and acknowledged but not demanding constant attention. The octuplets are there. Apu is their father. And also Apu is behind the counter at the Quick E-Mart, because Apu is always behind the counter at the Quick E-Mart, because that is who Apu is. But if you sit with the arithmetic of Apu's situation for a moment, a man with a doctorate working a convenience store job, who has been robbed a statistically absurd number of times, who is raising 8 children while maintaining the kind of cheerful reliability that makes him one of Springfield's most consistently present supporting characters. The picture that emerges is one of extraordinary resilience, deployed in service of a life that should, by any normal calculation, be somewhat overwhelming. Move now to Sideshow Bob. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is one of the most elaborately constructed villains in the history of animated television, and his relationship with Bart Simpson is one of the show's longest-running and most genuinely compelling ongoing storylines. Bob is a classically trained performer, an intellectual, a person of genuine artistic sensibility and considerable intelligence who has, for reasons the show examines with some care, redirected all of that intelligence and sensibility toward a single consuming goal: the elimination of Bart Simpson. Sideshow Bob has tried to kill Bart more times than can be easily counted. He has constructed elaborate schemes. He has escaped from prison multiple times, from what appears to be the same general correctional facility, and each time he has dedicated his freedom to another attempt on Bart's life. He has been to prison so many times that the experience has become a kind of recurring rhythm in his life, as familiar and expected as the seasons. He goes to prison, he plots, he escapes or is released. He attempts to kill Bart. He fails. He goes back to prison. The cycle repeats. Within this cycle, Bob has also somehow managed to maintain a reputation sufficient to, at one point, be elected mayor of Springfield. He ran for mayor under what turned out to be fraudulent circumstances, but the point is that he was credible enough as a candidate that the election required fraud to lose. A man who has been publicly and repeatedly identified as a would-be murderer who has served multiple prison sentences was plausible enough as a political figure that Springfield's voters needed to be deceived rather than simply persuaded. This says something about either Bob's charisma or Springfield's voters, and possibly both. Bob has also become a legitimate opera singer, performed on professional stages, maintained academic connections that have allowed him to publish work under his own name, and at various points has been shown living a life of cultural richness and genuine achievement alongside his career as Springfield's primary recurring antagonist. He is what you would get if you gave a supervillain a liberal arts education and then watched what happened when those two things competed for priority in the same person. The impossible thing about Sideshow Bob is not any one element of his story. It is the totality of it. A person who has done what Bob has done, who has the criminal record Bob has, who has the public profile Bob has, would not be able to move through the world the way Bob moves through it. He would not be able to get opera engagements. He would not be considered for civic office. He would not be able to walk into a restaurant and have a meal without being recognized and removed. And yet Bob does all of these things repeatedly because Springfield is a town where your history and your present do not necessarily prevent you from doing whatever you are trying to do next. This is, again, the standard mechanism. But Bob's case is extreme enough that it highlights the mechanism clearly. Springfield does not carry forward the implications of what has happened there. Bob can be a convict and a cultural figure and a political candidate and a would-be murderer, sometimes in the same episode, because Springfield allows for all of these identities to coexist without any of them definitively eliminating the others. Then there is Principal Seymour Skinner, or rather, and this is one of the most genuinely startling facts in the show's entire run, the man who has been calling himself Seymour Skinner for reasons that the show eventually made explicit. The real story of the Springfield Elementary principal is something the show handled in what has become one of its most controversial episodes, a story that pulled back a curtain the audience had not known was there and revealed something that permanently changed the way a careful viewer watches Skinner in every episode before and after it. The man who runs Springfield Elementary, who has butted heads with Bart for decades, who has a fraught and complicated relationship with his mother Agnes, who served in Vietnam and carries that service as a defining part of his identity. That man is not Seymour Skinner. He is a person named Armin Tamzarian, who assumed the identity of the real Seymour Skinner after Skinner was believed killed in combat. The real Skinner survived. He came back, and Springfield voted to keep the imposter and exile the real man. This is not, strictly speaking, a side character problem. It is one of the central characters, but it belongs in this section because of what it reveals about the logic of Springfield's entire supporting cast. If the principal of the elementary school has been operating under a stolen identity for 20 years, and if the town's response to learning this is to vote the lie into law and make honesty about it a crime, then what does that say about the other residents of Springfield? How many of the people who populate the background of this town are exactly who they appear to be? How many of them are operating under histories and identities that have been revised, borrowed, or simply invented because the original was inconvenient? The show does not raise this question explicitly. It does not want you to start auditing the cast. But once you know the Skinner story, you cannot fully unknow it. And it casts a gentle, strange light on every Springfield resident you subsequently see. The mailman, the convenience store owner, the bartender, the police chief. Everyone has a history. In Springfield, the histories are not always what they seem to be, and the town has a demonstrated willingness to vote its preferred version of reality into legal fact. Move on now to Hans Moleman, and please note that I am using his name as the show most commonly does, even though his name has been given as multiple different things across different episodes, which is itself a small and typical Springfieldian mystery. Moleman is the tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield and exists, within the comedic logic of the show, primarily to be harmed. He is hit by cars. He falls into excavations. He is attacked by animals. He is buried, burned, electrocuted, and crushed. And he survives all of it, because he must survive all of it, because he keeps appearing in subsequent episodes with no evidence of lasting damage. The impossible thing about Hans Moleman is that he has stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at him. Whatever visual language the show uses, however you interpret the animation, Hans Moleman does not look like a man in his early 30s. He looks like a very old man. He has the posture and the physical presentation of someone who has been aging for many decades. And yet, if you take the show at its word, and why would a cartoon character lie about his age? Except perhaps in the way that everything in Springfield lies about everything through the mechanism of simply never explaining itself. Moleman is 31 years old. Something happened to him. Something aged him catastrophically. Something took a young man and produced from him this small, stooped, nearly blind figure who shuffles through Springfield, absorbing punishment at a rate that should be medically significant and yet seems to leave him no worse for wear by the following episode. The radiation theory has an answer for this. Something in Springfield's environment, something in the water, something in the air, something drifting from those cracked cooling towers on the edge of town accelerated Moleman's aging in ways that his body has adapted to by becoming almost indestructible, even as it has made him look ancient before his time. The show does not give you this answer. The show gives you Hans Moleman being run over by a truck, and then Hans Moleman appearing in the next scene. And the implicit agreement between the audience and the show is that this is simply how things work in Springfield. But the agreement covers over something genuinely strange. A 31-year-old man who looks 80, a Springfield resident who dies repeatedly and returns without explanation, a character whose very existence is a small, persistent impossibility at the edges of every episode he appears in. He is not the only one, but he is the clearest example of the phenomenon. Springfield's background is full of lives that, when you slow down and look at them carefully, do not quite add up, not in ways that demand explanation from the show, but in ways that accumulate, one detail at a time, into the particular texture of a place where the normal rules of human existence apply only loosely and intermittently. This is perhaps the most peaceful way to understand Springfield's side characters. They are not quite real in the way the main family is real. They are impressions. They are the kind of people who populate the background of your dreams present, recognizable, serving their narrative function, but not subject to the same degree of logical scrutiny that you would apply to someone at the center of the story. In a dream, the man who pours your coffee at the dream diner does not need to have a coherent biography. He is the man who pours the coffee. That is enough. Springfield's side characters are the people who pour the coffee. They are there, and they are recognizable, and their presence makes Springfield feel like a place where people live. But their histories and their situations, when examined in detail, reveal the dream logic underneath. The doctorate and the octuplets and the 17 robberies, the escaped convict running for mayor, the school principal who is not who he says he is, the 31-year-old man who looks 80 and dies twice a season. They are all just exactly right enough to make Springfield feel real, and just strange enough when you look closely to make you wonder what being real in Springfield actually means. We are moving softly through this. There is no urgency. Let the side characters drift past like people you half recognize on a quiet street, present and plausible and carrying, behind their familiarity, secrets you will probably never quite get to the bottom of. That is Springfield. That has always been Springfield. And it is very good at feeling like home. There is a particular kind of person who makes the lives of everyone around them possible. Not the person who takes center stage. Not the one whose name appears in the title sequence first. The person who keeps the lights on while everyone else is having adventures. The person whose steadiness is so complete, so reliable, so thoroughly integrated into the structure of daily life that it becomes invisible, not because it is unimportant, but because it is so consistently present that the people who depend on it have long since stopped noticing it is. There. Marge Simpson is that person, and she has been that person for 36 years. And the more carefully you look at her life not through the lens of comedy, not through the warm, familiar glow of Homer's lovably disastrous existence, but through the patient, quiet attention of someone who is actually paying attention to Marge, the stranger, and more remarkable her situation becomes. Begin with the most basic fact. Marge is married to Homer Simpson. This is, obviously, the defining relationship of her life, and the show has spent 3.5 decades exploring it from every angle, in every register, with every comedic and emotional tool available. Their marriage has survived more crises, more near misses, more fundamental incompatibilities brought to the surface by specific comedic circumstances than almost any other fictional marriage in the history of television. And it has survived not just as a narrative convenience, not just because the show requires Homer and Marge to stay together, but because the show has invested real care in making the emotional logic of their marriage feel authentic. Homer loves Marge. This is not ambiguous. The show returns to it constantly, in big sweeping gestures and in small, quiet moments, in the way Homer sometimes just looks at Marge when she is doing something ordinary, with an expression that suggests he is dimly aware that she is. In some fundamental way, he could not articulate the best thing that has ever happened to him. The love is real and it is consistent, and it is one of the things that makes The Simpsons endure across decades. But the plot hole, the soft, persistent, quietly baffling fact that the show never fully addresses is what Marge's life actually looks like from the inside. Marge was, at the time the show began, a full-time homemaker. She managed the household, raised the children, provided the emotional stability that made it possible for Homer to be Homer without the family collapsing entirely. This was her primary role, and the show's early seasons found a great deal of both comedy and genuine emotion in exploring the particular interior life of a very intelligent woman, occupying a very traditional domestic role in a way that was sometimes fulfilling, and sometimes profoundly limiting. Over the course of the show, Marge has worked outside the home in numerous capacities. She has been a police officer. She has been an artist. She has been a real estate agent. She has worked at the power plant. She has run a pretzel cart. She has been a therapist, a snowplow operator, a gym owner, a gambling addict, a community theater actress, and at least one other thing I am certainly forgetting, because the list of jobs that The Simpsons has given its main characters would take longer to recite than most resumes contain. And in every case, Marge's foray into a non-domestic role has followed a similar arc. She discovers the role, or is pushed into it by circumstances. She finds that she has abilities she did not know she had, or that had been suppressed by the circumstances of her life. She experiences something success, or challenge, or a genuine moment of expansion into a version of herself that the domestic role did not allow for. And then, by the end of the episode or the storyline, she returns to the domestic sphere. Not always happily, not always without ambivalence, but reliably. This is a storytelling choice that the show has made consistently, and it reflects certain tensions in the cultural moment the show has been navigating. Since 1989, tensions about what it means to be a woman, about the relationship between domestic labor and personal fulfillment, about the ways that very smart people sometimes end up in lives that are not quite big enough for everything they contain. The show has navigated these tensions with varying degrees of success and varying degrees of self-awareness, and the navigation itself is interesting enough to spend some time with. But the plot hole is more specific than that. It is not about the cultural dynamics of Marge's domestic role. It is about the specific, concrete, logistical impossibility of Marge's life as the show depicts it. Marge maintains a household for 5 people, actually frequently for more than 5, because the Simpsons house has over the years housed grandparents, relatives, long-term guests, exchange students, and at various points what amounts to small communities. She cooks most of the family's meals. She manages the household's finances, which, given Homer's repeated and varied economic catastrophes, represents a considerable, ongoing challenge. She raises 3 children across significantly different developmental stages and with significantly different needs. Bart's needs are not Lisa's needs, and neither of them are Maggie's needs. And navigating all 3 simultaneously, while also being a functional adult human being, is not a small undertaking. She does all of this in a house that, the show has established, is located next door to Ned Flanders, which is its own ongoing low-grade challenge to her equanimity. She does it with a husband whose relationship to household responsibility is, to put it charitably, aspirational rather than consistent. She does it while also being, by any reasonable assessment, one of the most emotionally intelligent and interpersonally perceptive characters in the entire show, someone who understands the people around her with a clarity and depth that the show frequently demonstrates but rarely directly. Rewards? And here is the quiet impossibility at the heart of it. Marge does all of this, episode after episode, year after year, and she does not appear to be exhausted by it. She does not appear to have lost anything to it. Her hair is still impossibly tall. Her patience is still essentially intact. Her capacity for love and care and the particular kind of dogged optimism that keeps the family functional, none of it has been depleted by 36 years of being the person who makes everything work. Real people who function as the primary caregiver for a large, chaotic household while managing a partner whose life frequently creates significant domestic difficulty, those people get tired. Not always in ways that are visible from the outside, and not in ways that preclude love or commitment or genuine moments of joy. But the tiredness accumulates. It leaves marks. It changes a person, slowly and persistently, in ways that are not always comfortable or easy to acknowledge. Marge shows almost none of this. She has her moments of frustration, which the show depicts with care, and she has had several episodes centered on the genuine tension between who she is and the life she has chosen. But she returns, after each of these episodes, to a baseline of warmth and patience and functional optimism that, across 36 years, has barely shifted. This is partly a function of the show's episodic structure and its commitment to not permanently altering its main characters. But it is also, when you look at it in the context of everything the show has established about Marge's intelligence and perceptiveness, a quiet and interesting mystery. Marge sees everything. She understands the dynamics of her family and her community with a clarity that the show makes clear through dozens of small moments across its entire run. She knows what Homer is. She knows what Bart is doing most of the time, even when she is pretending not to. She knows when Lisa needs space and when she needs presence. She has a read on nearly every person she encounters. What does a person like that, perceptive, intelligent, emotionally sophisticated, do with the knowledge that their husband has, to date, been responsible for at least 7 near-nuclear catastrophes at the power plant where he works? What does she do with the accumulating evidence that their town has a 3-eyed fish in its river and a school that has lost its funding multiple times and a billionaire neighbor who, by any reasonable interpretation of the available evidence, has been personally engineering the conditions of their lives for his own benefit for longer than they have been alive? The show's answer, essentially, is that Marge focuses on the manageable. She focuses on the dinner that needs to be cooked and the argument between Bart and Lisa that needs to be mediated and the particular shape of Homer's need for reassurance on a given evening. She focuses on what is in front of her, because what is in front of her is considerable, and because the alternative, the full, clear-eyed assessment of what Springfield is and what living in it means, would require a kind of reckoning that the show is not structured to accommodate. There is a scene, quiet and easy to miss, in an episode from the middle seasons of the show where Marge is in the kitchen doing something routine, washing dishes, or preparing a meal, or the particular kind of domestic task that fills in the background of her daily life, and she has a moment of stillness. A moment where she is not actively managing anything, where the noise of the household has briefly subsided and she is just there, in her kitchen, in her house, in her life, and her expression in that moment is complex in a way that the show does not underline or elaborate. It is not unhappy. It is not resentful. But it is not simple contentment either. It is the expression of someone who is aware of something they have decided not to look at directly and who has learned to carry that awareness quietly, without letting it disrupt the surface of things. That expression, held for just a moment before the household reasserts itself and Marge re-engages with whatever needs her attention, is one of the show's most honest depictions of what Marge's inner life might actually look like. And it is never followed up on. It is a window that opens briefly and then closes. Marge is also, and this is easy to forget in the context of her domestic role, a person with genuine artistic talent. The show has established that she has real ability as a visual artist. She is not a hobbyist, dabbling in a pleasant but inconsequential direction. She has produced work that has been recognized as having genuine merit, work that suggested a creative voice and a visual sensibility that could, under the right circumstances, have constituted a serious artistic practice. Under the right circumstances? The circumstances of Marge's life have not, generally speaking, been the right ones for that kind of practice. The household, the children, the management of Homer's various disasters, the particular demands of being the person at the center of the family's gravitational field, all of these things have consistently superseded the artistic practice. Not because Marge chose to sacrifice it in any dramatic or definitive way, but through the slow, quiet accumulation of more immediate demands. The thing that can wait always waits, and it keeps waiting. And eventually the waiting becomes a kind of permanent deferral, which is different from a decision but feels, from the inside, a great deal like one. The show understands this about Marge, even when it does not fully articulate it. It knows that she has deferred things. It knows that the life she leads, as rich and as full of love as it genuinely is also a life in which certain possibilities have been set aside. And it approaches this knowledge with a complexity and a gentleness that is one of the things that keeps Marge from being simply a domestic stereotype. She is more than that. The show has always known she is more than that. And the gap between what she is and what her circumstances allow her to be is one of the softest and most persistent plot holes in the entire series. Not a plot hole in the sense of an error or an inconsistency. A plot hole in the sense of a space in the story where something is missing, where the narrative declines to go further, where the camera pulls back before the full picture is visible. The life Marge might have led if the circumstances had been different is a story the show suggests but never tells. It is always there, just off to the side of the story that is being told, present in the expressions and the small moments and the brief windows that open and then close. Marge Simpson is the most capable person in her family and one of the most capable people in Springfield. She has managed the unmanageable for 36 years, and the show has never quite figured out what to do with that fact except to let it sit there, quietly, in the background, like the tower of blue hair that she maintains in defiance of every law of physics that applies to hair. There are questions in her eyes, in the moments when the show lets you see them. They are soft questions, not angry ones. The kind you carry for a long time before you figure out whether you actually want the answers. We are drifting further into Springfield now. Let Marge's kitchen dissolve behind you, warm and bright and full of things that need doing. Somewhere ahead is Bart's room, which has its own quiet impossibilities. And beyond that, the rest of the town, patient and yellow and full of things that have never been explained. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He was 10 years old when the show began in December 1989. He was 10 years old when a new millennium arrived, and the world spent the first few days of January 2000 surprised to discover that the computers had not collapsed and the infrastructure had not failed, and the year 2000 was going to look a great deal like the year 1999. He was 10 years old through the first smartphone, through the normalization of social media, through streaming television, through the various cultural upheavals of 3.5 decades of rapid change. He is 10 years old right now. And he will be 10 years old in whatever year you are reading or hearing this, because Bart Simpson does not age. He exists in a permanent state of tenness, locked in the particular experience of being a fourth grader with a skateboard and a talent for mischief, and an older sister he genuinely loves, even though expressing that love directly would be catastrophic to his social image. This is, as I mentioned earlier, a feature of the show's structure rather than a mistake within its logic. Animated series, especially long-running ones, typically do not age their characters because aging creates storytelling problems that are easier to avoid than to solve. A 10-year-old Bart provides a reliable set of circumstances: the school, the pranks, the dynamic with Skinner, the relationship with his family that a 15-year-old Bart or a 20-year-old Bart would not provide in the same way. The show needs Bart to be in fourth grade, so Bart is perpetually in fourth grade. But the experience of Bart's permanent childhood is worth spending some time with, because it generates questions that go deeper than the production logic that explains it. What does it feel like to be 10 years old forever? The show does not ask this question directly. Bart does not experience his situation as unusual. He does not have the awareness of his own stasis that the audience has from the outside. From Bart's perspective, to the extent that a cartoon character has a perspective in any meaningful sense, he is simply a 10-year-old boy living a 10-year-old boy's life, and each episode is new to him even when it is familiar to us. But if you sit with the question gently, the way you sit with thoughts in the half-dark of a sleepy evening, it becomes interesting. Bart has been in Springfield Elementary School since before many of the show's current viewers were born. He has been in Mrs. Krabappel's class, and then, after the death of the actress who voiced her, navigating the show's careful and respectful handling of that loss since the show began. He has never been promoted. He has never moved on to fifth grade, to middle school, to the experience of being an older child or eventually a young adult. The school that has been the setting for so many of his adventures, the teachers and the dynamics and the particular social world of a fourth grade classroom, has remained his entire educational universe for 36 years. And here's the part that becomes quietly strange when you look at it. Bart has learned things in that classroom. He has had experiences at Springfield Elementary that have genuinely changed him, in the moment, in the way that a particular teacher or a particular friendship or a particular failure changes a real child. The show has depicted these changes with real care. Bart's relationship with Mrs. Krabappel, which evolved from straightforward antagonism into something considerably more nuanced and eventually quite affecting, is one of the show's more honest portraits of the complex relationship between a difficult student and the teacher who, despite everything, has not given up on him. But none of this learning accumulates. The growth that Bart experiences within individual episodes does not carry forward into the next one. He does not become smarter or kinder or more self-aware as a result of what happens to him in a given story. He remains, perpetually, the same version of himself that he was at the beginning. What the show has done very cleverly over its run is to create the impression of depth without requiring actual change. We know Bart. We understand him. We have spent so much time with him that his choices and his reactions and his particular brand of recklessness feel entirely coherent and familiar. He is not a flat character in the sense of being simple or uninteresting. He is a richly realized character who, by the logic of his situation, simply cannot grow. This creates a particular kind of melancholy, if you let yourself feel it. Not a heavy or distressing melancholy, but the soft kind. The kind you feel when something beautiful is also slightly sad. Bart is forever at the age where freedom and consequence are still slightly misaligned, where you can do the thing and the thing will have effects, but those effects will not follow you indefinitely because you are still a child and the world makes certain allowances for children. He is forever at the age where summer feels infinite and the school year is a temporary imposition, and the skateboard and the friends and the pranks are the real business of life. Most people pass through that age and leave it behind. The leaving is difficult, in its way, even when the things you are growing toward are worth growing toward. The freedom of being a child in the full, unencumbered, nothing is permanently your fault way that Bart is a child, that freedom is real, and its loss is a real loss, even when what replaces it has its own compensations. Bart will not lose that freedom. He will not have to grow past it. He will always be 10, always on the skateboard, always just outside Skinner's window, always finding the angle that adults cannot see because they have forgotten how the world looks from the height of a 10-year-old. There is something almost enviable about this. In the particular mood of a quiet evening, when you are thinking about time and what it takes from you as it passes. And then the other side of it arrives, slower and softer, which is that everything Bart will ever know, he already knows. Every friend he will ever make, he has made. Every version of himself he will become, he is already. The growth that the rest of us experience, the expansion, the complication, the discovery of capabilities and interests that you did not know you had at 10, none of that is available to him. Bart has a genius for a certain kind of problem. The show established early that his intelligence operates unconventionally, that he sees angles and possibilities that more traditionally intelligent people miss, that he has a social and practical intelligence that compensates for his academic struggles in ways that often produce better results than the academic approaches his sister favors. He is smart in the way that the world frequently fails to recognize as smart, and the show has always been aware of the tragedy in this. The way a particular kind of intelligence gets labeled as failure because it does not perform well on the tests designed to measure a different kind. But within the school setting that defines so much of his world, this intelligence cannot fully express itself. He is in 4th grade. He will always be in 4th grade. The arena in which he operates most of the time is one where his particular gifts are consistently measured against a standard designed to reward something else, and consistently found wanting by that standard. Outside of school, Bart's intelligence flourishes. The pranks, the schemes, the ways he finds of solving problems that adults would approach through completely different channels, all of this demonstrates a mind that, under different circumstances, might have extraordinary range. Springfield's history includes at least one episode in which Bart's unconventional intelligence is directly applied to something genuinely consequential and succeeds in ways that more conventional approaches had failed. The show knows what Bart could be, if the circumstances were right. It just keeps the circumstances wrong, because the right circumstances would require him to grow, and growth is the one thing Springfield cannot accommodate. There is also the matter of Bart's relationship with his father, which is one of the most emotionally complex things the show has produced and which is complicated in specific ways by Bart's permanent childhood. Homer and Bart's relationship is structured by a particular power dynamic, Homer as the father who is in many ways less mature than his son, Bart as the child who is in many ways more practically capable than his parent, both of them locked in a loop of affection and exasperation and occasional genuine understanding that the show returns to with deep familiarity. The loop is the point. The dynamic works because both participants are who they are in the proportions they are. An older Bart would change the dynamic in ways that might be interesting to watch, but would definitively end what makes the current version of it so enduring. A Bart who is 15 or 20 does not have the same relationship to Homer's authority, such as it is as a Bart who is 10. The power balance shifts. The emotional charge of their interactions changes. The particular combination of Homer's childlike impulsiveness and Bart's childhood agency, which produces so much of the show's best comedy and some of its most genuine emotional content, dissolves into something new. So Bart stays 10, and Homer stays mid-30s. And the dynamic stays what it has always been, warm and chaotic and recognizable. And the loop continues, and Springfield stays exactly what it is. There is a version of Bart's story that ends. A version where he grows up, leaves home, becomes someone, fails at some things and succeeds at others, and eventually looks back at his Springfield childhood the way real adults look back at theirs, with nostalgia and regret and gratitude all mixed together into the particular bittersweet flavor of remembered time. That version exists in the show's imagination. The show has depicted it, in flash-forward episodes, with enough care and specificity to prove that it knows what adult Bart would look like. It just never gets there. The flash-forward closes and the present reasserts itself, and Bart is 10 again, on the skateboard, outside Skinner's window, alive in the permanent now of Springfield's suspended afternoon. Maybe that is the kindest thing the show ever did for him. Or maybe the kindest thing would have been to let the afternoon end. Either way, the skateboard is still moving, and the window is still open, and Bart Simpson is still 10 years old, and the evening is soft around you now, and there is no rush. There are more mysteries ahead. They will wait. The Springfield nuclear power plant sits at the edge of town, like a rumor that everyone has heard and nobody wants to fully believe. Its cooling towers are visible from most parts of Springfield, established landmarks, background furniture in hundreds of episodes, so familiar that the audience stopped registering them as notable a very long time ago. They are just there. They have always been there. They will presumably always be there, leaking their particular brand of gentle, sustained impossibility into the air and water and daily life of everything within their radius. The plant is, by the internal evidence of the show itself, one of the most dangerous industrial facilities ever depicted in fiction. This is not an interpretation or a theory. The show has stated it directly through the mechanism of storylines, through inspection reports cited in dialogue, through the visible consequences of its operation on the environment around it, and through the demonstrated behavior of the person responsible for its safety. 342 violations. That is the number cited in a famous episode involving a surprise safety inspection. 342 safety violations documented in a single inspection at the Springfield nuclear power plant. The estimated cost to bring the facility into compliance was cited as $56 million, a sum that the plant's owner refused to spend despite having the financial resources to do so many times over. The violations were not corrected. The inspection report was presumably filed somewhere, and the plant continued to operate as it has always continued to operate because the plant is what it is and Springfield is where it is, and the two facts exist in a relationship that the town has never found a way to challenge. What does a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations actually look like from the inside? The show has shown us radioactive waste in unexpected locations, equipment in states of disrepair that would disqualify it from operation in any properly regulated facility, structural issues with the cooling infrastructure. The famous wad of chewing gum patching a crack in a cooling tower is one of the show's great throwaway visual gags, the kind that is funny precisely because it is so completely the wrong solution to a problem that should not be improvised around. And the luminous rats glowing from within, traversing the interior of the facility, entirely at home in an environment that has been so thoroughly saturated with radioactive material that the wildlife has adapted to it. The show plays most of this for comedy. It is framed as absurdism, as satire of industrial safety, culture, and regulatory capture, and the specific indifference that very wealthy men sometimes demonstrate toward the consequences their business practices have for people who are not them. All of these readings are valid. The show is doing all of those things simultaneously. But within the show's own internal logic, within the rules that Springfield applies to its own world, the power plant's condition has real consequences for real characters. The three-eyed fish did not appear in the river because the animation team thought it would be a funny visual. It appeared because the show's storytelling logic connected it directly to the plant's effluent. The fish has 3 eyes because something in the water near the plant caused it to grow a 3rd eye. This is stated explicitly. It is used as a political issue within the show's narrative. It is, within the world of the show, true. And if it is true for the fish, the question that the show raises and then gently declines to answer is what it means for everything else that lives in or near that water. Homer Simpson has worked at the power plant since before the show began. The timeline is somewhat flexible, as most Simpsons timelines are, but the consistent narrative is that Homer has been employed in the safety division of the nuclear facility for his entire adult working life. He is responsible for monitoring the reactor's operation and responding to anomalies that might indicate a safety issue. This is his job. This is what he is paid to do. Homer falls asleep at his workstation. This is not an occasional occurrence. It is essentially a consistent feature of his work experience, established across many episodes and treated as a background fact of his employment. The man responsible for nuclear safety at the Springfield nuclear power plant falls asleep on a regular basis in the control room. He also eats at the workstation. He has been shown taking his lunch, his snacks, and his donuts into the control room and consuming them while the reactor operates around him. He has, on at least one occasion, interacted with the reactor controls in ways that were not part of any sanctioned procedure, producing results that ranged from minor anomalies to things the show describes as meltdown adjacent. The plant's previous owner, or rather, the plant under competent management, in the episode where a German consortium briefly purchased it, immediately identified Homer's continued employment as a problem. The first thing the new owners did after taking possession of the facility was conduct an assessment of staff performance. The first employee they terminated was Homer. Because, of course, the first employee they terminated was Homer. Any rational assessment of Homer's fitness for his role in that facility would produce the same conclusion within the first few minutes of observation. Burns bought the plant back and rehired Homer, not through sentiment, not through fondness for a longtime employee, but for reasons that the show implies are considerably more calculated than they appear. A competent safety inspector would find the violations. A competent safety inspector would document the violations. A competent safety inspector would, in the normal course of their professional responsibilities, create a paper trail that would make the plant's continued operation in its current state very difficult to sustain. Homer does none of these things. Homer is the gap in the regulatory system, the soft spot where accountability would otherwise enter. He is not just an incompetent employee. He is, whether through deliberate selection or fortunate coincidence from Burns's perspective, the precise shape of incompetence that the plant requires in order to continue operating as it does. There is also the matter of the plant's effect on its local environment beyond the river and the three-eyed fish. The show has, across its run, depicted various forms of contamination emanating from the facility, and has connected those contaminations to specific effects on specific characters, without ever making the connection the explicit focus of a storyline. It is always happening in the background. It is always the context rather than the subject. But look at the context carefully. The Springfield of the show's internal universe is a town where the local wildlife has demonstrable mutations traceable to the plant's effluent. The local human population has physical characteristics, the yellow skin, the particular bone structure, the four-fingered hands that deviate from normal human appearance in ways that are consistent across the entire population. The billionaire who runs the plant requires weekly radiation treatments simply to survive, which means his body has been so thoroughly altered by decades of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal biological processes. And the man responsible for safety at that plant has a foreign object lodged in his brain that went undetected through decades of medical checkups in Springfield's healthcare system. None of these things are presented as connected within the show's narrative. The yellow skin is just the art style. The four fingers are just animation convention. Homer's crayon is just a funny premise. Burns's weekly treatments are just a one-off explanation for a sight gag. But they accumulate. When you lay them out quietly, in the dark, in the soft hour before sleep, they accumulate into something that feels less like coincidence and more like pattern. The power plant has been doing something to Springfield. The show has provided all the evidence for this without ever assembling it into a formal argument. Because assembling it would mean the show having to address it, and addressing it would mean Springfield having to change, and Springfield does not change. So the evidence sits there, distributed across decades of episodes, each piece individually plausible and easily dismissed, the total picture emerging only when you look at it all at once from a sufficient distance. The fish with 3 eyes. The skin that should not be yellow. The fingers that should be 5. The man in the control room, asleep. The cooling towers, visible from across town, their particular pale shapes part of the skyline that every Springfield resident has looked at every day of their lives without finding it alarming. The plant should have killed everyone. The evidence strongly suggests it has been doing something to everyone for a very long time, in ways that nobody has been positioned to notice, because the noticing would require exactly the kind of cognitive clarity and critical engagement that prolonged exposure to a leaking nuclear facility is not particularly conducive to. This is the power plant's most elegant contribution to Springfield's impossibility. It is not just a setting. It is not just a satirical target. It is, potentially, the mechanism by which everything strange about Springfield sustains itself. The source from which the mutations and the amnesia and the impossibly long lives and the three-eyed fish all ultimately draw their explanatory power. The plant keeps the lights on in Springfield. This is also, in a very literal sense, the most accurate description of what it does. Let the cooling towers recede into the background of your thoughts, where they have always been familiar shapes against a familiar sky, part of the landscape so thoroughly that their presence stopped being notable a long time ago. That is exactly how they work best. That is exactly how they have always worked. In Springfield and perhaps in you. Lisa Simpson is the smartest person in Springfield. This is not a casual observation. This is a fact that the show has established through dozens of episodes, through formal measures like IQ tests and academic competitions and standardized assessments, and through the less formal but equally compelling measure of watching her navigate a world that is consistently, comprehensively failing to operate at anything approaching her level. Lisa is extraordinary. Lisa is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most intelligent child characters in the history of American television. And Springfield does not know what to do with her. The not knowing what to do is the plot hole. Or rather, the not knowing what to do is the surface of a much larger mystery, which is the question of what happens to exceptional intelligence in a system that cannot accommodate it, in a community that cannot recognize it, in a family that loves it without fully understanding it, in a town that has been, by the accumulated evidence of 3.5 decades of storytelling, actively hostile to the kind of critical thinking and genuine engagement with reality that Lisa's intelligence represents. Begin with the school. Springfield Elementary is not, to put it gently, an institution that has historically distinguished itself through academic excellence. It has budget problems that are described as chronic. It has a principal whose relationship to educational quality is complicated by the enormous amount of his psychic energy that goes toward his ongoing conflict with Bart. It has teachers whose commitment to their work varies considerably from one classroom to the next. And it has, in Lisa Simpson, a student of genuine, extraordinary ability who is sitting in those classrooms receiving an education that is essentially designed for children performing significantly below her level. The show has addressed Lisa's educational situation directly, in episodes that have brought in alternative teachers and gifted programs and opportunities to engage with material at something approaching her actual level. These episodes are often some of the most moving the show produces, because they tap into something real about the experience of being a bright child in a system that was not designed for you. The arrival of someone who truly engages with your mind, who meets you where you actually are rather than where the curriculum assumes you to be. That experience is depicted in the show with a care and an accuracy that suggests the writers understood it personally. And then those episodes end. The gifted program closes. The brilliant substitute teacher leaves. The opportunity resolves. And Lisa is back in the regular classroom, doing the regular work, at the regular pace, because that is the structure that Springfield Elementary can sustain. This is, again, the standard mechanism. But for Lisa, the mechanism bites harder than it does for most characters, because the gap between what she is and what her circumstances allow her to be is so large and so consistently present. It is always visible. It is always relevant. And unlike Homer's gap between capability and circumstance, which is largely comedic and which Homer himself is not really aware of, Lisa's gap is something she lives with consciously every day. She knows she is capable of more. She knows the circumstances are not providing it. She feels the distance between these two facts as a kind of ongoing low-grade friction that is part of the basic texture of her experience. What is remarkable about this is that Lisa has not, across 36 years, become bitter. This is the really impossible thing, the genuine plot hole underneath the more visible one. A child of Lisa's intelligence and perception, in Lisa's situation, should, by the logic of how exceptional people in limiting circumstances tend to develop, either find a way out of those circumstances or develop a significant amount of anger about being in them. Real children who are as bright as Lisa and as consistently underserved as Lisa tend to find the combination difficult. They struggle. They push against the constraints. They find the distance between their capacity and their opportunity genuinely painful in ways that shape who they become. Lisa pushes against the constraints. The show depicts this consistently and with real warmth. She advocates for herself. She challenges authority when authority deserves to be challenged. She raises her hand in classrooms where nobody else is raising their hand, and asks the questions that make teachers uncomfortable, and pursues the threads of inquiry that her education is not providing any support for. She is not passive about her situation. She is not simply accepting of it, but she is, for all her advocacy and all her intelligence and all her genuine awareness of what Springfield is and what it is doing and what it fails to provide, still in Springfield. She is still in the 4th grade. She is still at Springfield Elementary. She is still the 8-year-old girl in the red dress with the saxophone, living in the house on Evergreen Terrace, loving her family with the particular complicated love of someone who sees them clearly and chooses, again and again, to stay. Why does Lisa stay in Springfield? This is a question the show has approached from many angles over its run, and the most honest answer it has arrived at is something like, because family is where you stay, even when family is not where you would choose to be if you were purely rational about it. Lisa loves her family. She loves Homer in the particular way that you love someone who is nothing like you and who you understand almost completely, which is a different kind of love than the love between people who are similar and in some ways a deeper one. She loves Bart in the way that siblings who are genuinely different from each other sometimes arrive at a love that transcends the difference, not by resolving it, but by accepting it as the basic fact of the relationship. She loves Marge with something approaching admiration, in the way that children sometimes see their parents more clearly than those parents see themselves. She stays because she loves them. She stays because she is 8. She stays because Springfield, for all its limitations and all its quiet impossibilities, is home in the most fundamental sense, the place where the people who shaped you are. But the show also knows, and has always known, that Lisa cannot stay forever. It has shown us the alternative repeatedly. Flash-forward episodes have depicted adult Lisa brilliant, accomplished, engaged with the world in ways that Springfield could never accommodate, shaped by the family she left but not defined by the limitations of the place she grew up. Adult Lisa is a real thing. She exists in the show's imagination, fully realized, clearly her. The show has imagined her with enough care and specificity to prove that it knows who she becomes. It just does not let her become it yet, because becoming it requires growing up, and growing up requires time to pass, and time passing requires the floating timeline to land, and the floating timeline landing requires the show to end. So Lisa is 8. Lisa will always be 8. And the show will keep finding ways to honor what she is while keeping her in the circumstances that she is too large for, because the circumstances are the story, and the story must continue. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs specifically to very intelligent people in communities that cannot quite see them. Not the loneliness of not being liked. Lisa is liked, in her family's specific and imperfect ways, but the loneliness of having thoughts you cannot share, because sharing them requires an interlocutor who can receive them, and that interlocutor is not present in your immediate environment. The loneliness of looking at the world around you and seeing things that other people are not seeing, and not being able to speak about what you see because speaking would require a level of engagement that is not on offer. Lisa has moments of connection with teachers, with occasional friends, with her saxophone, with the music that she has access to in a way she does not always have access to intellectual companionship. The saxophone is important. It is the thing that lets her be entirely herself without having to translate herself for anyone else. Music is the space where Lisa's intelligence, and Lisa's emotion, and Lisa's experience of being exactly who she is come together without mediation. The saxophone is also, in a quiet way, one of the show's great impossible things. Lisa has been playing it for 36 years. She has been, for all of those 36 years, a genuinely talented musician. She has not grown measurably better in that time, because growing measurably better would require time to pass, and the same mechanism that keeps her at 8 also keeps her musical development at whatever level the show needs it to be on any given episode. But the saxophone is always there. The sound is always warm and lonely and exactly right. And Lisa is always the child playing it, in a house where she is loved and in a town where she is not quite understood, with the particular expression of someone who has found, in one small corner of her life, exactly what she was looking for. That small corner. The warm sound of the saxophone in a Springfield afternoon. The low light. The way sound carries in empty rooms. Drift with that for a while. Let the music fill the space between thoughts. Lisa's intelligence is the show's conscience. She is the character who sees Springfield most clearly, who articulates most directly what is wrong with it and what could be different. She is the one who keeps asking the questions that Springfield has decided not to answer. She is, in the framework of the town's collective agreement to look away from uncomfortable things, the character most committed to looking. And she is 8 years old, and she will always be 8 years old, and Springfield will keep being exactly what it is, and Lisa will keep seeing it and saying what she sees, and the town will keep not quite hearing her, and the saxophone will keep playing in the background of it all, warm and true and quietly defiant. Sleep softly now. Lisa is still playing. You can hear it from here. Springfield has had a lot of visitors. This is an understatement on the scale of saying the ocean has some water in it. Over 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, The Simpsons has hosted an almost incomprehensible number of celebrity guest appearances. Musicians, actors, athletes, politicians, scientists, chefs, artists, authors, and an assortment of famous people whose fame exists in categories that defy easy labeling. They have come to Springfield for one episode at a time, contributed their voices and their presence to the specific comedic or emotional purposes of whatever story was being told, and then departed, returning to whatever version of the world exists outside Springfield's particular gravity. The guest appearances are one of the show's signature features, and they have been since the earliest seasons. The practice began with the understanding that celebrity voices, deployed properly, could do things for a scene that the regular cast could not. They bring a specific associative quality, a set of cultural meanings and reference points that the audience carries in from outside the show and that can be used, played with, subverted, or simply leveraged for the particular energy of recognition. But the guest stars have also, over 3.5 decades of this practice, created a set of storytelling problems that are fascinating to sit with in the quiet of an evening. The most basic problem is the one of scale. Springfield is a small town. It has been established as a community where everyone more or less knows everyone, where the social fabric is tight enough that a new resident or visitor is noticeable, where the same faces populate the same spaces in the regular rhythms of community life. A small town in America receives, on average, a certain number of visitors over the course of a year. Some of those visitors are locally significant. Occasionally, one of them might be nationally known. Springfield receives, apparently, several celebrities per season, and those celebrities, when they arrive in Springfield, behave as if Springfield is a completely natural destination for them. They interact with the Simpsons and the other Springfield residents as if this is a normal social situation. They perform their comedic function within the episode's storyline, and then they leave, and Springfield absorbs the experience and moves on, and the next episode proceeds as if the town has not just been visited by someone whose presence in a real equivalent of Springfield would be a genuinely major local event. This is, again, a feature of the show's design rather than a bug. The celebrity appearances work better if they are treated as natural rather than as the extraordinary occurrences they would be in any realistic equivalent of Springfield. Making a big deal of the celebrity's presence would slow down the storytelling and break the comic rhythm that makes the appearances effective. So, the show normalizes them, integrates them into the town's social reality as smoothly as it can, and trusts the audience to bring their own sense of incongruity to the situation. But across 36 years of this, Springfield has received such an enormous number of famous visitors that the accumulation begins to create a second-order problem. At some point, the sheer frequency of celebrity visits to this particular small town begins to strain credulity in ways that the individual episodes do not, because the individual episodes can sustain the illusion that this is a one-off thing, an unusual occurrence, a remarkable event, even as the pattern of the show makes clear that it is none of these things. Springfield is, apparently, one of the most visited places in America by people with significant cultural profiles. Why? What draws them there? What is it about Springfield, about this nuclear-contaminated, geographically uncertain, temporally suspended town on the edge of various inconsistent landscapes that makes it a destination for the culturally prominent and the internationally famous? The show does not answer this question, because the show cannot answer this question without acknowledging it. And acknowledging it would require the show to address the accumulation of guest appearances as a phenomenon rather than simply as individual episodes. But the coma theory, which we touched on earlier, has an answer. If everything since a certain point in the show's run is Homer's unconscious mind generating a dream, then the celebrity appearances are not celebrities visiting Springfield. They are fragments of external reality voices and names and faces that drift into the hospital room, carried by television programs and radio broadcasts, and conversations at Homer's bedside being processed by a dreaming brain and woven into the fabric of the dream. The celebrities appear in Springfield because Homer has heard their names in the ambient noise of the waking world, and his dreaming mind has given them presence, has made them real within the story it is telling. This is actually a rather beautiful reading of the phenomenon. The celebrities are not really there, they are echoes. They are the way that the outside world reaches into Homer's dream imperfectly, incompletely, in the distorted form that things take when they pass through the membrane between waking and sleep. The guest stars are not visiting Springfield. They are visiting Homer. There is also the matter of what happens to the guest stars when they leave. This is a question that is almost never addressed within the show, because what happens after the episode ends is by definition outside the episode's scope. But if you think about the kinds of interactions that guest characters have with Springfield during their visits, the crises they resolve, the relationships they form, the significant moments they share with the Simpson family and other Springfield residents, then the question of what those characters carry away from Springfield becomes interesting. A significant number of guest characters have had experiences in Springfield that would, in a real person's life, be genuinely formative. They have confronted personal crises. They have had insights about their own lives and careers that the Springfield encounter precipitated. They have made real connections with Homer or Marge or Bart or Lisa that felt, within the episode, like genuine human moments. And then they leave. And they take all of that with them into a world that is not Springfield, where the floating timeline does not apply, where consequences persist and time moves forward and the reset button does not get pressed at the end of every episode. A real person who had a Springfield experience who encountered, even briefly, the particular concentrated strangeness of this town, and these people would carry it differently than the show allows for. The experience would be part of them. It would show up in how they talked about things, in what they thought about when they were not thinking about anything in particular, in the way that certain significant encounters with certain unusual places and people tend to stay with you. The show cannot depict this because the guests appear once. Their lives after Springfield are, by definition, off-screen. But there is something interesting in the implication in the idea that out there, in the world beyond Springfield's uncertain borders, there is a substantial population of people who had a Springfield experience and carried it away with them into lives that the show has never shown us. What do they make of it? What do they tell their friends? How do they describe the town, the family, the particular quality of a place where the fish have 3 eyes and the sky is always yellow and time moves in ways that do not quite correspond to how time usually moves? They probably do not tell anyone. This is the nature of the kind of experience that Springfield provides. It is not the kind of thing you can explain to someone who has not been there. It makes perfect sense from the inside and produces only confusion from the outside. And the most reasonable response to that kind of confusion is to simply absorb the experience privately and let the world continue as it was. Which is, of course, exactly what Springfield does with everything. The experience is had, the episode ends, and the world continues, and nobody explains anything, and Springfield moves on to the next thing. There is also a visual anomaly that the guest appearances create, one that is worth noticing and then letting drift. When celebrity characters appear in Springfield, they are drawn differently from the regular residents. Their skin tones are more varied and more realistic. Their proportions are slightly different. Their eyes are a different shape. They look like people from the real world rather than people from Springfield. This is partly a practical choice. Recognizable likenesses need to be rendered with enough accuracy that the audience can identify who they are supposed to be. But within the internal logic of the show, the visual difference between Springfield residents and outside visitors is consistent and notable. The people who live in Springfield look one way. The people who come from outside look a different way. And the difference is precisely the difference you would expect if the people who live in Springfield have been changed, gradually and cumulatively, by their environment, by the water, the air, the particular invisible presence that emanates from the cooling towers on the edge of town in ways that the people who visit briefly have not been. The guest stars look like normal humans because they are normal humans who have not been in Springfield long enough to be changed by it. The Springfield residents look like Springfield residents because they have been there their entire lives. This is the visual argument for the contamination theory, built into the show's own art style, visible in every episode that includes a guest appearance and never, in 36 years of the show's run, commented upon by a single character. The fish has 3 eyes, the residents are yellow, and the guests look normal, and nobody says anything. This is Springfield. This has always been Springfield, and the evening is deepening around you now, soft and slow, and Springfield is still exactly what it is. Let the guest stars drift past on their way out of town. They are heading somewhere that has a fixed location and proper water quality and a normal number of eyes per fish. They are heading back to the world where things make sense in the conventional way. And Springfield is staying right where it is, or rather, right where it might be, in the gentle, floating space between everywhere and nowhere. We have been here a long time tonight. There is still more to see. Every October, The Simpsons breaks the rules it has been carefully not breaking for the rest of the year. The Treehouse of Horror is the show's annual Halloween anthology, a collection of short horror stories and genre parodies that operate outside the normal continuity of the series. Characters die. The laws of physics collapse. Aliens, monsters, witches, demons, and various other entities from the full spectrum of horror and science fiction make appearances and do things that would be completely impossible within the regular narrative. The episodes are framed as non-canonical from the beginning. They are explicitly labeled as stories told in a spooky context, tales that do not count in the ordinary sense, events that will not have carried over by the time next week's regular episode arrives. This is, on the surface, the simplest possible category of Simpsons impossibility. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are not plot holes because they are not trying to be canon. They are holiday specials, genre exercises, comedic horror anthologies that use the Simpsons characters as vehicles for their own kind of storytelling. The rules do not apply because the episodes themselves declare that the rules do not apply. But the Treehouse of Horror has been running since the show's second season. It has been running for over 30 years. And across that time, it has accumulated enough material, enough recurring elements, enough internal consistency within its own framework of inconsistency that it has begun to develop something that looks, from a sufficient distance, like its own kind of continuity. The non-canonical has been happening consistently for so long that it has become, in its own way, canonical. Not in the sense that its events carry over, they don't, and that is by design, but in the sense that the Halloween version of Springfield is now as established and as recognizable as the regular version, and the relationship between the two has become one of the show's more interesting recurring mysteries. Consider what the Treehouse of Horror has established about the people of Springfield. Across 30-plus years of annual horror storytelling, Springfield's residents are, in the Halloween episodes, consistently vulnerable to supernatural threats. They are susceptible to alien takeovers, to demonic bargains, to monster attacks, to the full range of horror genre conventions that the episodes deploy. This is entirely expected. They are the protagonists of horror stories, so they must be in danger from horror story antagonists. But the specific ways in which they respond to these threats, the specific dynamics that emerge under supernatural pressure, are remarkably consistent across the many episodes of the anthology. Homer, in the Halloween episodes, is almost always more terrifyingly dangerous than the actual threat he is ostensibly facing. When Homer becomes a monster literally in some episodes, effectively, in most of them, the results are consistently worse than whatever the original horror premise established. Homer as a plant-human hybrid is more destructive than anyone could have anticipated. Homer, as a supernatural bargainer, consistently outmaneuvers the demonic entities he deals with in ways that should not be possible for someone of his documented cognitive limitations. Homer as a ghost is significantly more disruptive to his own family than most of the actual supernatural disruptions the family encounters. This is funny. This is the point. The joke is that Homer is, somehow, more than the monster. But the joke contains a genuine insight about Homer's character that the regular episodes also establish in subtler ways. Homer is, for all his apparent limitations, someone whose fundamental nature is extremely difficult to alter or contain. He adapts, he persists, he finds the angle. Even in horror situations that should overwhelm him, Homer ends up being the most Homer thing in the room, and this turns out to be more powerful than whatever the horror was supposed to be. The Treehouse of Horror also has a consistent relationship with death that is worth examining carefully. Characters die constantly in these episodes. Main characters, significant supporting characters, the entire population of Springfield. In some instances, death is a frequent and generally comedic occurrence in the Halloween anthology. And because the episodes are non-canonical, the deaths do not count. Everyone is fine again in the next regular episode, having never been killed in the Treehouse of Horror episode that aired the previous week. This creates an interesting philosophical situation within the show's internal logic. There is a version of Springfield where Homer has been killed dozens of times, where Marge has been a monster and a witch and a variety of supernatural entities, where Bart has died in elaborate genre-appropriate ways, where the entire town has been taken over by aliens and subsequently dismantled in various terrible fashions. And there is the regular version of Springfield, where none of this has happened, where the family is intact and the town is functioning in its normal, impossible way, and where none of the Treehouse events are part of anyone's memory or history. These two Springfields coexist in the show's output. They run in parallel, one per year for the Halloween special and 40-some episodes per year for the rest. And the audience navigates between them with the kind of ease that speaks to how thoroughly the show has trained us to compartmentalize its different registers of reality. But the compartmentalization raises a question. If the Treehouse of Horror Springfield is not real, if it is explicitly framed as separate from the show's ongoing reality, then what makes the regular Springfield real? Both Springfields operate by their own internal rules. Both are depicted with the same visual language, the same characters, the same setting. The only difference is the framing. One is explicitly labeled as a horror story, and the other is explicitly presented as the show's ongoing narrative reality. What if the labeling is doing more work than it appears to? What if the distinction between the Treehouse of Horror Springfield and the regular Springfield is not as fixed as the framing suggests? There are episodes in the show's regular run that operate with a logic indistinguishable from the Treehouse of Horror. Events happen that, by any reasonable assessment of the show's internal rules, should not be possible events that the show treats as regular episode events, carrying the same narrative weight and the same expectation of continuity as any other storyline, but which strain the show's regular episode reality at least as severely as the overtly supernatural events of the Halloween specials. Homer meets God, twice, not in a Treehouse of Horror context, but in regular episodes. These are presented as actual encounters. Homer actually talks to God, and God actually responds. The encounters have real emotional consequences within the narratives they are part of. They are not labeled as dreams or fantasies or horror anthology non-canonical stories. They are regular Simpsons episodes, and in regular Simpsons episodes, Homer has met God. This is the kind of event that the Treehouse of Horror franchise typically handles. Encounters with the supernatural, meetings with divine or demonic entities, the collapse of the normal physical order. These are Treehouse of Horror territory, and yet they appear in the regular run with the same matter-of-fact treatment that the show gives to Homer losing his job or Bart getting into trouble at school. What this suggests is that the boundary between the Treehouse of Horror Springfield and the regular Springfield is more permeable than the framing implies. The Halloween anthology is not a separate realm of impossibility that is carefully quarantined from the rest of the show. It is an exaggeration of the impossibility that already exists. In the regular episodes, a version of Springfield with the volume turned up, the constraints relaxed, the internal rules bent further than usual. But the same basic character of the place persists across both versions. Springfield is always a place where unusual things happen, and where the usual responses to unusual things surprise, investigation, lasting consequence tend not to materialize. The Treehouse of Horror makes this explicit. The regular episodes make it implicit. And the 30-plus years of annual Halloween specials that exist alongside the regular run have created, in aggregate, a portrait of a Springfield that is always slightly beyond the normal, that has, sitting underneath its surface, a quality of unreality that the Halloween episodes bring to the foreground, but that was never entirely absent. The paradox of the Treehouse of Horror is that its non-canonical nature is exactly what makes it revealing. By officially setting aside the rules, by explicitly framing itself as a place where the rules do not apply, the Halloween anthology shows you what the rules are protecting, and in doing so, reveals that the protection was never quite complete. Springfield's reality has always been fragile. The Treehouse of Horror is just the one time per year when the fragility is acknowledged out loud. There is also the matter of what the Treehouse of Horror has done to the audience's relationship with the show's main characters over time. 30 years of watching Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa die in various Halloween-appropriate ways, and then watching them be fine again the following week, has produced a particular kind of viewer psychology. We know they will be fine. We know the deaths do not count. And this knowledge, applied year after year across 3 decades, has given us a very deep familiarity with the specific ways in which each character dies, the particular comedic choices that the show makes about Homer's death, versus Bart's death versus Lisa's death, the specific emotional register that each character occupies even in a horror comedy context. This is an extraordinary amount of familiarity with the mortality of characters who do not actually die. We have watched them die more times than we can easily count, and we have never had to grieve any of it, because the framing tells us we do not need to. The deaths are safe. They are contained within the Halloween bracket. They cannot touch the real Springfield. But they leave a residue. Not a dark or upsetting residue. Nothing about the Treehouse of Horror is designed to genuinely disturb in the way that the best horror aims to disturb, but a residue of familiarity nonetheless. A sense that we know, as a viewer community, what it looks like when Springfield's worst happens. We have seen the worst in the Halloween bracket, and we have laughed at it, and we have watched it reset, and we have come back the following week to the regular Springfield and found it warm and intact and exactly as it should be. This is perhaps the most important thing the Treehouse of Horror does for the audience's relationship with Springfield. It allows us to experience, safely and with comedic framing, the catastrophic versions of things that the regular show is always dancing around the edges of. The power plant melting down, the family coming apart, Springfield being destroyed. The supernatural forces that seem to hover at the edges of the regular episodes getting fully unleashed and doing what they were always threatening to do. And every time it resets. Every time, Springfield is fine. The family is intact, the town is standing, the cooling towers are still there on the edge of the skyline. This is the real function of the Treehouse of Horror. It is a pressure valve. It lets the audience experience the collapse of Springfield's impossible equilibrium in a context where the collapse is temporary and funny and safe, so that when the regular episodes do their work of sustaining that same impossible equilibrium, the audience can feel the warmth of it without being too closely attended by the anxiety of knowing how fragile it is. We know it is fragile. The Treehouse of Horror has shown us, 30+ times, exactly how fragile. But the regular episodes keep rebuilding the warmth, and we keep coming back to it, and the balance between the two is one of the things that has kept this show alive for 36 years. The Halloween episodes are the dream within the dream. The dark version of an already unusual world, safe to visit precisely because it is contained, allowed to be itself precisely because it is labeled as separate. And then the label comes off in November, and Springfield goes back to being exactly what it has always been, warm and yellow and impossible and entirely, completely home. Let the Halloween version drift away now. Let the monsters and the aliens and the demonic entities dissolve back into the particular darkness from which they came. What remains is the regular Springfield, the one you know, the one that has been there every week for 36 years, the one that will be there next week and the week after and every week for as long as the floating timeline keeps floating and the loop keeps running, and Bart stays 10 years old and the beer stays cold, and nobody in Springfield ages a single day. We are almost at the end of our journey through Springfield's impossibilities. There is one more place to visit before sleep arrives fully. One more question to sit with in the long, soft dark. We are nearly there. Take your time. Here at the end, in the quietest part of the evening, with the rest of Springfield's mysteries having drifted into the soft middle distance of your thoughts, there is one more thing worth noticing. One more question that sits at the center of everything we have been exploring tonight, holding all the other questions together the way a spoke holds a wheel. Why do we keep coming back? Not why do we keep watching. The show is entertaining and warm and funny and sometimes genuinely moving, and these are sufficient reasons to watch a television program. But why does Springfield feel like a place we come back to rather than simply a show we watch? Why does the experience of being in Springfield, for the duration of an episode or an evening or a long sleepy night of drifting through its mysteries, feel less like watching fiction and more like visiting somewhere that has a claim on you? The plot holes we have explored tonight are the shape of the answer. Every unanswered question in Springfield, every detail that does not add up and is never explained, every soft impossibility that accumulates across decades of storytelling. All of these things do the same work that certain kinds of real places do. They create depth. They suggest a history that goes further back than you can see and extends further forward than you can follow. They make the place feel inhabited in a way that goes beyond what is shown on screen, in the way that real places feel inhabited by the accumulated weight of everything that has happened in them, most of which you can never know. The yellow skin that nobody explains, Homer's memory that keeps clearing itself, the geography that refuses to commit to a location, the side characters whose lives are quietly impossible, Marge's deferred potential, Bart's permanent 10-year-old afternoon, the power plant that should have ended everything and instead became background furniture, Lisa's intelligence in a world that cannot quite accommodate it, the guest stars who arrive from outside and look subtly different from the people who have always been there, the Halloween versions that show you the worst of it and then reset. All of it, every piece of it, adds up to a portrait of a place that is not real in any verifiable sense and yet feels, to millions of people who have spent time there, completely and unmistakably real in the ways that matter. This is what good fiction does, and The Simpsons, at its best, is very good fiction. It creates a world with enough internal consistency to feel coherent and enough unresolved mystery to feel alive. A world that is fully explained is a closed world. A world that retains its unexplained things is an open one, one that you can keep returning to, keep finding new angles in, keep having new conversations with, because it has not been exhausted by its own explanations. Springfield has not been exhausted. 36 years and 800 episodes in, there are still things in Springfield that have not been explained, still corners that have not been illuminated, still questions that the show has been living alongside for decades without seeing the need to resolve. The yellow skin is still yellow. The timeline is still floating. The power plant is still running. The fish still has 3 eyes. And the family is still there. This is the thing that matters most. The thing underneath all the plot holes and the impossibilities and the questions that never get answered. The family is still there. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie in the house on Evergreen Terrace, living their impossible, unchanging lives in their impossible, unchanging town, loving each other in the specific, chaotic, imperfect, entirely convincing way that the show has been depicting since before most of its current audience was born. The love is not a plot hole. The love is the thing that explains why we come back, even though the show keeps raising questions it never answers, and sustaining impossibilities it never acknowledges. We come back because of what the family is. Because Homer's love for Marge is real within the world of the show in a way that transcends the cartoon logic around it. Because the dynamic between Bart and Lisa contains something true about the relationship between siblings who are different from each other and love each other anyway. Because Marge's patience and Maggie's silence and Lisa's music and Homer's perpetual surprised delight in the fact that his life contains what it contains, all of it coheres into something that the impossibilities and the plot holes cannot undermine because it exists at a level deeper than plot. The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. The characters have not aged a single day. The town has not changed in any fundamental way. The power plant is still running. And none of it, none of the impossibility, none of the unanswered questions, none of the 36 years of floating timeline and reset button and accumulated mysteries, none of it has made Springfield feel like a place you can afford to stop caring about. That is the real mystery. Not the yellow skin or the geography or the three-eyed fish. The mystery is the caring. The mystery is why a fictional town, populated by cartoon characters who have not aged in 4 decades, who live in an impossible geography and breathe impossible air and speak to each other in a language of recurring jokes and familiar beats. Why this place has such a genuine claim on so many people's affections? The answer is probably simpler than any of the theories we have been exploring tonight. The answer is probably just family. The specific warm weight of a family that loves each other, shown to you week after week in a form that never changes, never ages, never goes away. The reliability of it, the way Springfield is always there when you come back to it, exactly as you left it, the couch in the same place and the beer cold in the same fridge, and Homer saying the same thing he has always said, and the kids responding in the ways they have always responded. It is not just nostalgia, though nostalgia is part of it. It is something closer to what a fixed star is for navigation, not a destination, but a point of reference. A place in the sky that is always in the same place, that you can use to orient yourself regardless of where you are or how lost you have managed to get. Springfield is a fixed star of the American cultural imagination, and it has been one for 36 years, and its fixedness, the very thing that generates all the plot holes and the unanswered questions and the impossible stasis of the floating timeline, is also what makes it so useful, so comforting, so genuinely irreplaceable. The loop never breaks because we have decided not to break it. Springfield stays exactly what it is because we have decided, collectively and individually, in the way that decisions about things you love tend to get made not through deliberation, but through the simple fact of returning again and again, that this is what we want. The yellow family in the yellow town, in the impossible geography, with the unanswered questions and the floating timeline and the three-eyed fish and the power plant and the loop that never breaks. We pressed pause in 1989. We have never pressed play. And Springfield will be there when you wake up. It will be there when you come back tomorrow night, or next week, or in 5 years when you find yourself putting on an old episode for comfort in the way that you reach for certain things, when you need to feel that the world is basically okay and basically recognizable and basically still containing the things you love. Springfield will be there. The family will be on the couch. The opening credits will play. The couch gag will happen, and then the story will begin. And it will be new, and it will be familiar, and it will be set in a place you know better than you know some real places. And for the duration of the episode, you will be in Springfield, in the warm, impossible heart of it, and the plot holes will be there too, soft and unassuming, part of the furniture. Let them be part of the furniture tonight. The yellow skin, the floating timeline, the three-eyed fish, the power plant, the geography that belongs everywhere and nowhere, the side characters with their impossible lives, Marge's deferred everything, Bart's permanent afternoon, Lisa's music in an empty room, and the guest stars heading back out of town with something they probably cannot explain to anyone who was not there. All of it drifting softly in the dark. Homer is still at the power plant. Bart is still on the skateboard. Lisa is still playing. And Maggie, behind the pacifier, is still watching everything, saying nothing, waiting. For what? The show has never said, but Springfield will be there when she decides. It always is. Springfield has institutions, proper ones, with buildings and staff and the appearance of regular operation. It has a city hall, a police department, a hospital, a court system, a fire department, a nuclear regulatory presence, a school district, a library, a natural history museum, a zoo, a retirement home, a prison, and at least 2 competing television stations. It has, in short, the institutional infrastructure of a functioning American municipality. And every single one of these institutions is, by any reasonable assessment of the evidence the show provides, operating at a level of dysfunction that would, in the real world, attract immediate and sustained attention from oversight bodies at the state and federal level. The police department is perhaps the most consistently depicted example. Chief Clancy Wiggum leads a force whose relationship to effective law enforcement is best described as aspirational. The Springfield Police Department has, across 36 years of the show, failed to solve crimes that were solved by citizens, failed to notice crimes that were committed in plain sight, arrived at crime scenes in time to comment on their aftermath, and pursued investigations that went in the wrong direction for reasons that sometimes seem to reflect not incompetence, but something more comfortable, a kind of institutional preference for certain conclusions over others. Wiggum himself is a complex figure, actually, in ways that the show does not always acknowledge. He is lazy and often corrupt and willing to bend the law in ways that favor the powerful. He is also, underneath the laziness and the corruption, a person with occasional genuine warmth and occasional genuine decency who exists in a situation leading an underfunded, understaffed police force in a town with more structural problems than any police department could address that would challenge a considerably more capable chief than he is. The cases Springfield's police have failed to solve are remarkable in their scope. Crimes committed by characters who were known to have committed similar crimes before. Evidence that pointed clearly in directions the investigation chose not to follow. Witnesses who were not interviewed. Perpetrators who confessed and then recanted and then confessed again, without the process ever arriving at anything resembling accountability. The shooting of Mr. Burns is the most famous example, but it is far from the only one. Springfield's crime history is extensive and largely unresolved. The town has experienced vandalism, fraud, theft on various scales, assault, at least one actual kidnapping, several instances of property destruction so severe they qualify as criminal damage, and a consistent pattern of the person responsible either not being identified and not being charged, or being charged and acquitted, or being convicted and released within an episode or two. Justice in Springfield is not blind. It is something more interesting than blind. It is selective, and the selection criteria reflect the town's particular power dynamics in ways that the show depicts with a satirical consistency that is easy to miss if you are watching individual episodes rather than the full pattern. The hospital is another one. Springfield General Hospital has treated Homer Simpson for injuries that should have required months of recovery and has discharged him the same day or the following morning, or on whatever schedule the episode's plot required. It has diagnosed conditions, prescribed treatments, and managed health crises with a competence that varies enormously from episode to episode in ways that seem to reflect the needs of the story rather than any consistent medical standard. The hospital's emergency department has seen a great deal of Homer over the years. This is not surprising given the rate at which Homer encounters situations that require emergency medical attention. What is surprising is the degree to which Homer's medical history, the crayon, the repeated head injuries, the various industrial accidents, the numerous times he has been declared dead or technically dead before being revived, has not produced a more consistent clinical picture in the records that Springfield General presumably maintains. A real hospital with a patient like Homer would have an extensive file. That file would tell a story, not the story of cartoon invulnerability, but the story of a man whose body has been subjected to an extraordinary degree of trauma over an extended period, and whose recovery from each incident has been improbably complete. The file would be remarkable. It might be the most remarkable file in the history of that hospital, and someone, at some point in the 36 years of Homer's medical history with that institution, would have looked at it and had a question. Nobody at Springfield General has had that question. Or if they have, the question has not been followed up on in any way that the show depicts. Homer's medical history is a closed book, not because it is not there, but because the institution that holds it has not treated it as something that requires interpretation. The court system is similarly interesting. Springfield has judges. Judge Snyder is the most frequently depicted who have adjudicated cases with a combination of legal formalism and personal eccentricity that produces outcomes that are, occasionally, correct in the sense that they match the facts, and frequently correct in the sense that they serve the interests of whoever has the most influence over the proceedings. Judge Snyder's most remarkable ruling is the one that pertains to Principal Skinner's identity. In that episode, he issued a legal decree making it permanently illegal to mention the truth about Armin Tamzarian's identity. This is not a thing that a court in any jurisdiction with a functioning legal system can actually do. The First Amendment issues alone would be significant. The bizarre jurisdictional question of how a municipal judge has the authority to criminalize speech about a matter of public record would be insurmountable in any normal legal environment. But this is Springfield, where the legal system reflects the town's own logic, the logic that says whatever the community needs to be true, it can make true through the appropriate institutional mechanisms. Springfield's institutions are all doing versions of the same thing. They are providing the appearance of normal civic function while operating on principles that are considerably more flexible than their real-world equivalents would allow. The police department provides the appearance of law enforcement. The hospital provides the appearance of health care. The court system provides the appearance of justice. The school provides the appearance of education. The regulatory framework around the power plant provides the appearance of environmental oversight. And because the appearances are consistent and familiar and produced with enough specificity to feel real within the show's world, the audience accepts them as the real things rather than the appearances of the real things. Springfield has institutions. The institutions are functioning. Whatever the institutions are actually doing, which is something considerably different from what their real-world equivalents are designed to do, it is close enough to the appearance of normal function that neither Springfield's residents nor Springfield's audience tends to examine it too carefully. This is, again, the mechanism by which the town sustains itself. The appearances are maintained, the questions are not asked, and life in Springfield continues along its warm, comfortable, entirely impossible trajectory. Springfield's media is another institutional impossibility worth sitting with for a moment. The town has at least 2 television stations. Channels 6 and 4 have both featured in various episodes, and a newspaper, The Springfield Shopper, which has reported on events in Springfield with the kind of journalism that is produced by an institution whose resources and editorial standards are at some remove from what the industry would ideally provide. Channel 6 is home to Krusty the Clown's Show, which is the dominant children's entertainment in Springfield, and to Kent Brockman's news programming, which is the dominant source of local news for Springfield residents who get their news from television. Kent Brockman is, in his way, one of the show's most interesting characters, a television journalist whose relationship to the actual practice of journalism is complicated by ego, self-interest, and a very specific understanding of his role as a performer of news rather than a reporter of it. Brockman has, across the show's run, reported on Springfield events with a combination of genuine reportorial instinct and spectacular willingness to abandon any journalistic principle when his own comfort or celebrity is at stake. He has, famously, pivoted in real time to welcome alien overlords based on a misunderstanding. He has reported on stories that were false because the false story served his narrative. He has also, on occasion, practiced something that looks quite a lot like actual journalism, investigating genuine wrongdoing, reporting uncomfortable truths, asking the questions that the official version of events does not want asked. What Brockman's career illustrates, when you look at it across the full span of the show, is the way that a media institution in a town like Springfield functions. It serves some of the functions that journalism is supposed to serve. It informs, it alerts, it provides a space for accountability while also serving the functions that journalism in a captured or compromised media environment serves, which is to say that it reflects the interests and the limitations of the community it operates in, rather than standing outside that community as an independent check on it. Springfield's journalism is Springfield's journalism. It is yellow, in every sense of the word, and it has been yellow for 36 years, and nobody in Springfield seems to find this particularly troubling. The institutions are holding, the town is running, and none of it is quite what it appears to be, and nobody is quite asking why. That is Springfield's institutional life, drifting softly through the background of every episode, present and functional, and entirely, quietly impossible. Springfield is full of relationships that should not have survived the specific circumstances the show has subjected them to, and yet have survived anyway, intact and largely unchanged, because Springfield is a place where the normal rules of how relationships develop and dissolve under stress do not apply with the same consistency they apply everywhere else. Begin with the most central one. Homer and Marge's marriage has survived situations that, in a real marriage, would be considered deeply significant challenges. Homer has, at various points and in various configurations, come extremely close to romantic entanglement with other women. The show has depicted this carefully, and with real emotional weight in several episodes, exploring the genuine tension of attraction when it exists outside the primary relationship, the complicated feelings that come with recognizing something in another person that your current life does not provide space for. These are not throwaway plots. These are episodes that take seriously the idea that Homer and Marge's marriage is a living thing that requires maintenance and can be damaged. And yet, after each of these episodes, the marriage continues. The thread is resolved, or not quite resolved, but folded into the relationship's ongoing story in a way that does not definitively alter it. Homer is Homer and Marge is Marge, and they are married, and the marriage persists through everything the show puts it through, because the marriage is one of the fundamental facts of Springfield, and fundamental facts do not change. Ned Flanders and Homer's relationship is another one. Homer has, across 36 years, treated Ned with a combination of dismissal, envy, casual cruelty, occasional genuine affection, and the specific kind of thoughtlessness that comes from never quite taking another person seriously enough to consider what impact your behavior has on them. Homer has borrowed things from Ned without returning them. He has damaged Ned's property. He has, indirectly and directly, contributed to situations that caused Ned significant pain. And Ned has forgiven all of it, every single time. Because that is who Ned is, or rather because that is who Ned has been conditioned to be. But here is the impossible thing. Ned's continued goodwill toward Homer, his continued patience, his continued willingness to help and share and forgive and be there, this persists even after the show revealed that Ned's niceness is not a natural character trait, but the product of childhood behavioral modification. We know that the person underneath the programming is someone with a great deal of suppressed anger. We know that the programming has failures under sufficient pressure. We have seen Ned snap, briefly and dramatically, in the hurricane episode. And yet the programming reasserts itself every time. The patience returns. The goodwill is there again. And Homer and Ned are neighbors again, in exactly the same relationship they have always been in, as if the snap never happened and the programming never showed its seams. This is the relationship the show can least afford to change. Ned and Homer are archetypes. They represent something important about the show's moral architecture, the relationship between the man who tries hard and is not rewarded for it, and the man who does not try particularly hard and is not particularly punished for it. Their adjacency is the show's most sustained ironic commentary on the relationship between virtue and outcome. If Ned ever genuinely withdrew from Homer, if he ever reached a point where the weight of what Homer has cost him became too much to simply forgive and forget, the moral architecture of the show would need to be fundamentally rethought. So Ned does not withdraw. The programming holds. The relationship continues. And the gap between how Ned treats Homer and how Homer deserves to be treated remains exactly what it has always been, because changing it would change something about Springfield that is not available for change. Bart and his various nemeses represent another category of impossible relationship persistence. Springfield Elementary School has its social hierarchy, and within that hierarchy, Bart occupies a particular position not at the top, which is too comfortable for his narrative function, but in the kind of lateral position where he has influence and freedom of movement without the stability of genuine social security. The bullies who hassle him are still doing it 36 years later. The kids who admire him are still admiring him for the same reasons. The social dynamics of Springfield Elementary are as frozen as everything else in Springfield, preserved at exactly the state they were in when the show began. Nelson Muntz is perhaps the most interesting of Bart's Springfield elementary relationships. Nelson is the most prominent bully in Bart's social world, and his relationship with Bart is more complex than simple antagonism. The show has depicted genuine moments of friendship between them, genuine moments of mutual understanding that the social structure of their environment does not normally allow for. They are, in certain lights, quite similar, both existing at angles to the conventional expectations of their context, both finding their own ways through a world that was not quite designed with them in mind. And yet the basic dynamic persists. Nelson is the bully. Bart is the kid the bully sometimes bullies. The moments of genuine connection exist within this framework, without dissolving it. The relationship is, like all Springfield relationships, preserved in the specific state the show needs it to be in, modified by individual episode plots but returned to its baseline configuration before the next episode begins. Moe's relationship with the Simpson family is another one worth noticing. Moe Cieslak, the bartender at Moe's Tavern, has a relationship with Homer that is among the most consistently and specifically depicted in the show. Homer spends a great deal of time at Moe's. The bar is his third place, his refuge, the space where he processes the various difficulties and delights of his life in the particular way that a certain kind of person processes things in the company of familiar faces. With a beer in hand, in a room that has its own comfortable familiarity, Moe himself is a person of significant complexity, which the show has developed gradually across its run. He is lonely in a very specific way, the kind of loneliness that belongs to someone who has been in the same place for a very long time and has watched everyone around them pass through while he remained stationary. He has had relationships, briefly, with various women who appear for an episode and then do not return. He has attempted to improve his situation in various ways, redecorating the bar, trying different business models, even attempting to present a more favorable version of himself to the world, and has consistently returned to the same dark and dusty tavern, the same stained apron, the same position behind the bar that he has occupied since the show began. What the show has done with Moe, over its run, is to suggest that underneath the crusty exterior and the occasional genuine menace is a person capable of real feeling and real connection. There are episodes that crack Moe open and reveal what is underneath, and what is underneath is affecting in the particular way that the show's best character work is affecting. It is true to the character's established nature while also being surprising, revealing something that was always present but not always visible. And then the episode ends, and Moe is Moe again, crusty and present behind his bar, and the crack closes, and the relationship with Homer returns to its baseline, and Springfield goes on. This is the rhythm of all of Springfield's relationships. They deepen and reveal and surprise, within the scope of individual episodes, and then they return to themselves. Not because nothing happened, but because the show requires its characters to be available for the next episode in the same configuration they were available in for the previous one. The depth is real. The return is also real. Both things are true simultaneously in Springfield. The way that many things that seem contradictory are both simultaneously true in a place that operates by Springfield's particular logic. The relationships are impossible in the way that all the best things about Springfield are impossible, in the way that requires a certain kind of squinting to see, a certain angle of vision that does not try too hard to make the pieces fit the way pieces are supposed to fit in the real world, but simply accepts them as what they are. The furniture of a place that has been home to you for a very long time, familiar in ways that go past logic into something softer and harder to name. Let the relationships settle around you. Ned forgiving Homer, Bart back on the skateboard, Moe behind the bar, the same people in the same places doing the same things for 36 years and counting. There is something extraordinarily comforting about that, actually. Whatever happens in the real world, Springfield's relationships are exactly where you left them. They always are. The Simpsons has been running long enough that some of its recurring jokes have outlasted whatever made them funny in the first place, and have become something else, something closer to tradition, or ritual, or the particular kind of inevitability that belongs to things that have been done so many times they have become part of the texture of existence. Homer strangling Bart is perhaps the most famous example. The recurring bit where Homer grabs Bart by the throat and begins strangling him, always depicted in an exaggerated, cartoonish way, always resolved quickly, always generating Bart's characteristic gurgling protest, is one of the show's most iconic images. It has been merchandised, parodied, referenced in other shows and used as a shorthand for the show itself in a way that very few specific comedic moments from any show achieve. And it is, if you think about it in the context of the world outside Springfield, a depiction of child abuse. The show knows this. It has always known this. The strangling is not depicted as something the show endorses or normalizes in a genuine sense. It is clearly exaggerated, clearly comedic, clearly in the register of the kind of absurdist violence that animation has deployed since its earliest days to generate laughs from situations that would be deeply troubling if depicted realistically. Tom and Jerry did things to each other that, in any realistic context, would be catastrophic. The Roadrunner cartoons operated on similar principles. Animation has a long tradition of comedic violence that the audience understands as comedy rather than endorsement. But The Simpsons is not Tom and Jerry. It is a show with genuine emotional depth and genuine realistic grounding in human psychology and family dynamics. It is a show that takes seriously the interior lives of its characters and the emotional texture of their relationships. And within that show, Homer strangling Bart is simultaneously a comedic shorthand and a persistent visual reminder of something that the show does not quite want to address directly, which is the reality of what it means to be a child in an environment where the adult authority figure responds to frustration with physical force, even a cartoonish, harmless version of it. The show has occasionally pulled back from the strangling to ask what it actually means. There are episodes that examine Homer's parenting, that consider what Bart's experience of having Homer as a father actually is, that make space for the complexity of a relationship that contains both genuine love and genuine failure. These episodes are among the show's most honest and most affecting. They suggest that the writers know what the strangling represents underneath the comedy, and that they are capable of engaging with it directly when the story calls for it. And then the next episode has the strangling again, as a quick gag, and the cycle continues. This is not a criticism. It is a description of how the show manages the tension between its comedic register and its emotional register, and it is a management strategy that has worked for 36 years. The strangling is funny in context and complicated out of context, and the show has learned to be comfortable with both of those things being simultaneously true about the same repeated image. The recurring burns that Homer endures are similar in their dynamic. Homer's various injuries and indignities, the electrical shocks, the falls, the encounters with animals that invariably end badly for Homer, the industrial accidents at the plant are part of the show's comedy, and they are also, taken together over 36 years, a catalog of suffering that would be genuinely concerning in any realistic context. Homer has been hurt more times than a person could reasonably be expected to recover from, and he has recovered from all of it, and the recovery is always complete, and the next episode he is ready to be hurt again. There is something almost meditative about this pattern when you watch the show in the slow, soft state you are in right now. Homer's capacity for suffering and recovery is so complete, so reliable, so thoroughly built into the show's rhythms, that it stops being a feature of his physical experience and becomes something closer to a spiritual quality. He is the man who bounces, the man who gets back up, not because he is strong, particularly Homer is not especially strong in any conventional sense, but because the world of Springfield requires him to be available for the next episode, and the world of Springfield always gets what it requires. The Flanders God joke is another recurring element worth examining. The show has established, across its run, that God exists within Springfield's universe. This is not just a matter of faith. God has made direct appearances, has spoken to characters, has been depicted as a real entity with a real presence in Springfield's world. And the joke that the show returns to repeatedly is that God seems much more engaged with Homer Simpson than with the devout and faithful Ned Flanders. God talks to Homer. God appears to Homer. God has conversations with Homer in which Homer demonstrates approximately no theological sophistication, and God seems to enjoy his company anyway. Meanwhile, Ned, who has dedicated his life to faith, who attends church consistently, who structures his entire existence around his religious beliefs, who has suffered genuine losses and continued to turn toward his faith in response to those losses. Ned does not receive these direct visitations. The divine appears to choose the wrong man. The slacker gets the audience. The faithful man gets the silence. This is a very old joke, theologically speaking. The idea that grace does not reward virtue, that divine attention does not track human merit, that God's choices are fundamentally mysterious and not reducible to human categories of deservingness. This is territory that serious theological thinking has been in for a very long time. The show does not take it seriously in the sense of engaging with it as theology. It takes it seriously in the sense of using it consistently, returning to it across many episodes, treating it as a genuine feature of Springfield's spiritual landscape. And the recurring joke accumulates, over time, into something that is no longer quite a joke. The gap between what Ned deserves by any reasonable accounting and what Ned receives is genuinely troubling if you look at it steadily. The show laughs at this gap. The audience laughs at this gap. And underneath the laughter is something that is not quite comfortable to sit with the suggestion that the universe of Springfield, like all the best fictional universes, does not guarantee that doing the right thing leads to good outcomes. Homer does everything wrong and has a wonderful life. Ned does everything right and has a hard one. And God apparently prefers to talk to Homer. This is, if you let it, one of the most honest things the show has ever said. The background gags are their own category of impossible persistence. Springfield's background is full of things that appear in one episode and should never appear again. Vehicles parked in front of buildings they have no reason to be in front of, community notices for events that should have ended decades ago, signs advertising services that the town's apparent economic situation could not support. These are the details that animators insert because they are funny in the moment and because nobody is expected to pause and read every sign in the background of every scene. But in an era of streaming, where pausing is easy and rewatching is common, and the dedicated community of Simpsons fans includes people who have spent extraordinary amounts of time cataloging exactly these kinds of details in this era, the background gags have become a secondary layer of storytelling that the show created without fully intending to create. They are the visual equivalent of Homer's forgotten jobs. They exist. They are real within the show's world, or at least they appear within the show's visual field. And their persistence across episodes, their refusal to be removed or corrected, adds to the general impression that Springfield is a place where nothing quite gets cleaned up, where the detritus of the past is always present somewhere in the frame. Springfield is not a tidy town. It never has been. The garbage accumulates literally in certain episodes, and figuratively in the sense of the accumulated weight of all the things the show has shown and never fully resolved. And somehow the accumulation is part of the charm. The clutter is part of the familiarity. A perfectly tidy Springfield would be a different Springfield, and it would feel less like home. Let the recurring jokes drift through your thoughts now. Homer strangling Bart. Moe answering the phone for a non-existent person. Ned being unfailingly kind to someone who has given him no particular reason to be kind. The couch gag. The chalkboard gag. The specific comedic rhythms that the show has maintained for 36 years until they became not just jokes but the texture of the show itself, inseparable from what Springfield is. These are the rituals of Springfield. They are the things that tell you, every week, that you are back, that Springfield is what it is, that nothing has changed, and nothing needs to change, and the couch is right where you left it. Good. Settle in. We still have more ground to cover. Springfield's economy is one of the show's most persistent, quiet mysteries. By any reasonable analysis of the information the show provides, the town should not be able to sustain itself financially. And yet it does, episode after episode, year after year, because Springfield's economy operates on principles that are approximately adjacent to the principles that govern real economies, without being quite identical to them. The power plant is the obvious anchor of Springfield's economic activity. Burns's facility employs a significant portion of the town's workforce, not just Homer, but dozens of workers whose continued employment depends on the plant's continued operation. The plant generates the electricity that powers the town, which means that in addition to being an employer, it is also the utility that every Springfield resident depends on for the basic function of their homes and businesses. This creates a relationship between Springfield's residents and Burns's economic power that is quite intimate and quite lopsided. Burns provides the electricity. Burns provides the employment. Burns provides the economic stability that makes the town viable as a community. The residents, in exchange, provide their labor and their dependence. And Burns, who understands this arrangement with perfect clarity, has never shown any indication that he considers it anything other than entirely to his advantage. Homer's salary has been cited at various points in the show, and the numbers are not always consistent, which is itself a small and characteristic Simpsons inconsistency. But the general picture is of a household income that is modest by any national standard, and that the show has consistently depicted as the source of significant financial stress for the family. The Simpsons struggle with money. They have had their electricity cut off, their house mortgaged in ways that created precarious situations, their ability to afford things that other families treat as basic necessities occasionally strained. And yet Homer and Marge have raised 3 children in a suburban home, maintained a car, eaten out with some regularity, taken vacations, and generally lived a life that, while not affluent, is not materially desperate either. The economics of their household are, like the economics of most fictional families in American sitcoms, calibrated to whatever the episode needs them to be stretched when the plot requires financial stress, comfortable when the plot requires the family to do something that requires money. Springfield's small businesses present their own economic puzzle. Moe's Tavern has been depicted as financially struggling. The bar is often shown as having few customers, as being on the verge of closure, as barely keeping Moe solvent. And yet it persists, decade after decade, apparently generating enough revenue to keep the lights on and the beer cold and Moe in the building, despite the consistent implication that the economic picture is not robust. The same is true of many of Springfield's small businesses. The Quickie Mart is an international franchise, which presumably provides some economic support, but the picture of Apu's daily business suggests a customer base that is not dramatically larger than the number of people who appear in his store across the various episodes in which it features. The barbershop, the florist, the various restaurants and specialty stores that have appeared across Springfield's history, all of them seem to exist in an economic environment that is just viable enough to sustain them without ever quite making anyone comfortable. This is, actually, one of the show's more realistic elements. The experience of running a small business in a small American town, the constant awareness of how thin the margin is, the perpetual question of whether this month will be the one that pushes you over some threshold you have been working to stay behind. This is something that the show has depicted with more accuracy than it sometimes gets credit for. Springfield's small business ecosystem feels real in the way that the economic realities of small-town America feel real, which is to say, precarious and stubborn and somehow continuing despite everything. Springfield's public finances are another matter. The city government has, across the show's run, been depicted as systematically underfunded, often corrupt, and intermittently capable of genuine civic function despite both of these things. Mayor Quimby, the show's Kennedy-adjacent political figure, governs a city whose budget appears to be managed with the kind of flexibility that would interest any municipal auditor who happened to look closely. Funds get redirected. Projects get started and abandoned. Public services are provided at whatever level the plot requires, which varies considerably. The school district's finances are a particularly consistent theme. Springfield Elementary runs on a budget that the show has described as inadequate, that has been cut repeatedly in response to various municipal decisions, and that has required the school to operate in conditions that its students and staff clearly find insufficient. The school's physical plant has deteriorated. Programs have been eliminated. Resources that should be present are not present. And Principal Skinner, or the person who calls himself Principal Skinner, manages the institution under these conditions with a combination of genuine dedication and the specific kind of resignation that belongs to people who have accepted, at some deep level, that the resources they need to do their jobs properly are simply not going to arrive. Lisa's experience at Springfield Elementary is shaped substantially by this economic reality. The school's inability to provide the level of intellectual engagement she requires is not simply a matter of teacher quality or curriculum design. It is also a matter of resources. A better-funded Springfield Elementary could, in theory, provide the gifted programming and the specialized instruction and the additional academic opportunities that Lisa's intelligence warrants. The budget does not allow for these things. And so Lisa continues to be underserved, and the school continues to function at whatever level its resources support, and the gap between what the school is and what a well-resourced school could be remains exactly what it has always been. None of this is resolved by the show. The economics of Springfield, like everything else about Springfield, reach an equilibrium that is not quite stable and not quite unstable, a perpetual middle state in which things are always approximately on the verge of being better or worse and are always, in the end, exactly what they have been. The plant keeps running, the bar keeps serving, the school keeps teaching. The The mayor's office keeps governing with its particular combination of incompetence and self-interest, and the town persists. This is, perhaps, the most accurate thing the show has ever depicted about the experience of life in a small American town. Not the nuclear plant, not the celebrity visits, not the impossible geography, the economics. The specific, persistent, never quite resolved economic fragility of a place that is always running on less than it needs and somehow always continuing anyway. The bar that should have closed years ago still open. The school that is clearly underfunded still teaching. The family that probably cannot quite afford their life still living it. This is Springfield's economy. It is also, in a quiet way, a portrait of a great deal of American economic life. Let it settle around you now, the way economic anxiety tends to settle in the background, always present, never quite demanding immediate attention, but never quite absent either. In Springfield, the background hum of financial precarity is just part of the air. Like everything else in Springfield, it has always been there. And like everything else in Springfield, you eventually stop noticing it and simply accept it as one of the conditions of living in this particular place. Springfield has animals, quite a few of them, actually not just the Simpson family's own pets, but a broader population of wildlife and domestic animals that appears across various episodes and whose behavior, when you look at it carefully, is as strange and as quietly impossible as everything else in this town. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family's greyhound, is the most consistently present animal character in the show. He has been part of the family since the first season, acquired by Homer and Bart in a moment of impulsive generosity at a dog racing track when the dog lost his race and was abandoned by his owner. The adoption of Santa's little helper is one of the show's most genuinely warm early moments, a small act of kindness that costs Homer something real and produces something real in return, the specific joy of a dog who has found its people. Santa's little helper has, across 36 years, maintained approximately the same personality and approximately the same relationship to the family that he has always had. He is enthusiastic and somewhat dim and deeply loyal in the particular way of dogs who have bonded with a family not because they have been trained to be loyal, but because they have simply decided, at some level below conscious choice, that this is their family and that is that. He has also, across 36 years, not aged. This is the animal version of the floating timeline. Santa's little helper was an adult dog when the show began. Adult greyhounds live typically between 10 and 14 years. Santa's little helper has been alive for 36 years, which is approximately 2.5 to 3 times the expected lifespan of his species. He should not exist. And yet he does. In the same condition he has always been in, enthusiastic and dim and deeply present. Because Springfield does not permit aging for its beloved recurring characters, whether they are human or otherwise. The show has occasionally acknowledged Santa's little helper's age in ways that suggest the writers are aware of the issue. There have been episodes dealing with health challenges, with veterinary visits, with the family confronting the possibility of loss. These episodes are handled with the care that the show brings to its most emotionally significant material. They take seriously the grief of anticipating the loss of a beloved pet, which is a real and significant human experience that the show has always been good at honoring. And then Santa's little helper is fine again. The health challenge resolves, the possibility of loss recedes, the dog is back in the house, being enthusiastically inappropriate with various household objects, unchanged. Snowball, the family's cat, or rather the sequence of cats who have occupied the role of the family's cat across the show's run, is an interesting companion case. The original Snowball died early in the show's run, and the replacement process produced a sequence of snowballs that the family has managed with varying degrees of official acknowledgement. The current Snowball, Snowball 2, or some later iteration, is simply the family cat, present and unremarkable, occupying the background of the Simpsons household with the particular self-contained dignity of cats everywhere. The cat's existence raises its own small questions. If Santa's little helper has outlived his species' lifespan by a factor of 2 or 3, what does that say about the environmental conditions in Springfield? Either the family's pets are subject to the same temporal suspension as the human residents, which would suggest that the mechanism behind Springfield's frozen timeline is not specific to human biology, or the water and air that have been doing whatever they have been doing to Springfield's human residents have also been doing something to Springfield's animal population, producing a different set of effects but from the same source. Blinky the three-eyed fish is the most explicit evidence for the second explanation. The fish's mutation was directly connected, within the show's own narrative, to the power plant's environmental contamination. If Blinky's mutation is real within Springfield's world, and the show treats it as real, then the environmental contamination that produced Blinky is also real, and the question of what that contamination does to other organisms in the affected environment is not merely theoretical. Springfield's wildlife has appeared across various episodes in states that suggest the local ecosystem has been affected by the plant's operation. There are animals in Springfield's forests and parks and waterways that behave in ways that real animals of their species do not behave, that appear in places where they should not be, that survive encounters with Springfield residents that would, in a normal wildlife context, have very different outcomes. The bears are a particular example. Springfield has had bear encounters. The town's response to the presence of bears has been both comedic. The Bear Patrol episode is one of the show's great works of political satire, depicting the community's response to a perceived threat as wildly disproportionate in ways that the show uses to make a pointed argument about fear and governance and oddly matter-of-fact, as if the presence of bears in a suburban American town is not particularly surprising. This last point is worth noticing. Springfield's residents are surprised by many things, but they are not consistently surprised by things that should be surprising in the context of their environment. A bear in a suburb is surprising. A three-eyed fish is apparently only surprising enough to generate a single political controversy before being absorbed into the background. A dog that has been alive for 36 years is not surprising at all, because nobody in Springfield is in the habit of tracking the passage of time. The animals of Springfield are like the residents in this respect. They exist in the present. The present is what it is. Whatever the environment has done to them, they have adapted to, and the adaptations are simply part of what they are, and life in Springfield continues around them and with them and through them, warm and yellow and full of creatures that should not exist but do, because Springfield requires them and Springfield always gets what it requires. Let the animals drift through your thoughts now. Santa's little helper, 36 years old and enthusiastic. Blinky, swimming somewhere in the river with his three eyes wide open in the dark water. The bears that the town responds to with disproportionate civic panic. The luminous rats in the power plant's basement. All of them part of Springfield's ecosystem. All of them shaped by the same invisible forces that have shaped everything else in this town. All of them present and persistent and entirely, quietly impossible. Here at the end, in the quietest part of the evening, with the rest of Springfield's mysteries having drifted into the soft middle distance of your thoughts, there is one more thing worth noticing. One more question that sits at the center of everything we have been exploring tonight, holding all the other questions together the way a spoke holds a wheel. Why do we keep coming back? Not why do we keep watching the show as entertaining and warm and funny, and sometimes genuinely moving, and these are sufficient reasons to watch a television program. But why does Springfield feel like a place we come back to, rather than simply a show we watch? Why does the experience of being in Springfield, for the duration of an episode or an evening or a long sleepy night of drifting through its mysteries, feel less like watching fiction and more like visiting somewhere that has a claim on you? The plot holes we have explored tonight are the shape of the answer. Every unanswered question in Springfield, every detail that does not add up and is never explained, every soft impossibility that accumulates across decades of storytelling, all of these things do the same work that certain kinds of real places do. They create depth. They suggest a history that goes further back than you can see and extends further forward than you can follow. They make the place feel inhabited in a way that goes beyond what is shown on screen, in the way that real places feel inhabited by the accumulated weight of everything that has happened in them, most of which you can never know. The yellow skin that nobody explains, Homer's memory that keeps clearing itself, the geography that refuses to commit to a location, the side characters whose lives are quietly impossible, Marge's deferred potential, Bart's permanent 10-year-old afternoon, the power plant that should have ended everything and instead became background furniture, Lisa's intelligence in a world that cannot quite accommodate it, the guest stars who arrive from outside and look subtly different from the people who have always been there, the Halloween versions that show you the worst of it and then reset, the institutions that function just enough to maintain appearances, the relationships that should have broken and never did, the recurring jokes that have outlived their explanation, the economics that should not sustain a town and somehow do, The animals that live and persist and never quite age? All of it, every piece of it, adds up to a portrait of a place that is not real in any verifiable sense and yet feels, to millions of people who have spent time there, completely and unmistakably real in the ways that matter. This is what good fiction does, and The Simpsons at its best is very good fiction. It creates a world with enough internal consistency to feel coherent and enough unresolved mystery to feel alive. A world that is fully explained is a closed world. A world that retains its unexplained things is an open one. One that you can keep returning to, keep finding new angles in, keep having new conversations with, because it has not been exhausted by its own explanations. Springfield has not been exhausted. 36 years and nearly 800 episodes in, there are still things in Springfield that have not been explained, still corners that have not been illuminated, still questions that the show has been living alongside for decades without seeing the need to resolve. The yellow skin is still yellow. The timeline is still floating. The power plant is still running. The fish still has 3 eyes. Santa's little helper is still there, still enthusiastic, still improbably alive. And the family is still there. This is the thing that matters most. The thing underneath all the plot holes and the impossibilities and the questions that never get answered. The family is still there. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie in the house on Evergreen Terrace, living their impossible, unchanging lives in their impossible, unchanging town, loving each other in the specific, chaotic, imperfect, entirely convincing way that the show has been depicting since before most of its current audience was born. The love is not a plot hole. The love is the thing that explains why we come back. Even though the show keeps raising questions, it never answers, and sustaining impossibilities, it never acknowledges. We come back because of what the family is. Because Homer's love for Marge is real within the world of the show in a way that transcends the cartoon logic around it. Because the dynamic between Bart and Lisa contains something true about the relationship between siblings who are different from each other and love each other anyway. Because Marge's patience and Maggie's silence and Lisa's music and Homer's perpetual surprised delight in the fact that his life contains what it contains, all of it coheres into something that the impossibilities and the plot holes cannot undermine because it exists at a level deeper than plot. The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December 1989. The characters have not aged a single day. The town has not changed in any fundamental way. The power plant is still running. And none of it, none of the impossibility, none of the unanswered questions, none of the 36 years of floating timeline and reset button and accumulated mysteries, none of it has made Springfield feel like a place you can afford to stop caring about. That is the real mystery, not the yellow skin or the geography or the 3-eyed fish. The mystery is the caring. The mystery is why a fictional town, populated by cartoon characters who have not aged in 4 decades, who live in an impossible geography and breathe impossible air and speak to each other in a language of recurring jokes and familiar beats, why this place has such a genuine claim on so many people's affections. The answer is probably simpler than any of the theories we have been exploring tonight. The answer is probably just family. The specific warm weight of a family that loves each other, shown to you week after week in a form that never changes, never ages, never goes away. The reliability of it. The way Springfield is always there when you come back to it, exactly as you left it, the couch in the same place and the beer cold in the same fridge, and Homer saying the same things he has always said, and the kids responding in the ways they have always responded. It is not just nostalgia, though nostalgia is part of it. It is something closer to what a fixed star is for navigation, not a destination, but a point of reference. A place in the sky that is always in the same place, that you can use to orient yourself regardless of where you are or how lost you have managed to get. Springfield is a fixed star of the American cultural imagination, and it has been one for 36 years, and its fixedness, the very thing that generates all the plot holes and the unanswered questions and the impossible stasis of the floating timeline, is also what makes it so useful, so comforting, so genuinely irreplaceable. The loop never breaks because we have decided not to break it. Springfield stays exactly what it is because we have decided, collectively and individually, in the way that decisions about things you love tend to get made, not through deliberation, but through the simple fact of returning again and again that this is what we want. The yellow family and the yellow town, in the impossible geography, with the unanswered questions and the floating timeline, and the three-eyed fish, and the power plant, and the loop that never breaks. We pressed pause in 1989. We have never pressed play. And Springfield will be there when you wake up. It will be there when you come back tomorrow night or next week, or in 5 years when you find yourself putting on an old episode for comfort in the way that you reach for certain things, when you need to feel that the world is basically okay and basically recognizable and basically still containing the things you love. Springfield will be there. The family will be on the couch. The opening credits will play. The couch gag will happen, impossible as ever. And then the story will begin, and it will be new, and it will be familiar, and it will be set in a place you know better than you know some real places. And for the duration of the episode, you will be in Springfield, in the warm, impossible heart of it, and the plot holes will be there too, soft and unassuming, part of the furniture. Let them be part of the furniture tonight. The yellow skin, the floating timeline, the three-eyed fish, the power plant, the geography that belongs everywhere and nowhere, the side characters with their impossible lives, Marge's deferred everything, Bart's permanent afternoon, Lisa's music in an empty room, the guest stars heading back out of town with something they probably cannot explain to anyone who was not there, the institutions functioning at just enough, the relationships persisting past every challenge, the recurring jokes that have become ritual, the economics that should not add up but somehow do, the animals that outlive their lifespans, the loop that never breaks, all of it drifting softly in the dark. Homer is still at the power plant, Bart is still on the skateboard, Lisa is still playing, Marge is still in the kitchen, Santa's little helper is somewhere near the couch. And Maggie, behind the pacifier, is still watching everything, saying nothing, waiting. For what? The show has never said. But Springfield will be there when she decides. It always is. There is a version of Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerucham Krustovsky's life that is genuinely tragic, and The Simpsons has been quietly depicting it for 36 years while keeping enough comedy in the frame that most of the audience has never had to sit directly in front of that tragedy for very long. Krusty is a clown. He is also a man. And the distance between those two things, the distance between who he performs and who he is one of the show's most sustained and most honest examinations of what it costs to be a public figure in a life that was shaped by private grief. Begin with the basic setup. Krusty the Clown is Bart Simpson's idol. This is established in the show's earliest episodes, and it is a relationship that the show has taken seriously across its entire run. Bart does not idolize Krusty the way a child idolizes a pop star at a comfortable and theoretical distance. Bart idolizes Krusty in the way that certain children idolize certain performers, with a passionate and personal intensity that suggests the performer is somehow speaking directly to something in the child that no one else has reached. Krusty's comedy reaches Bart. It gives Bart something. The show has never been entirely explicit about what that something is, but the shape of it is visible in a household and a school and a town that frequently miss the point of Bart Simpson. Krusty's comedy sees him, or seems to, or gives him the feeling of being seen, which in childhood is often enough. And then the show begins to reveal what Krusty actually is, underneath the performance. He is a man who became a clown partly to escape something, the weight of an Orthodox Jewish father's expectations, a tradition and a community that Herschel could not fit himself into comfortably, and who has discovered that escaping into a persona does not resolve the things you were escaping from. It just relocates them. Krusty's father, Rabbi Krustovsky, spent decades ashamed of his son's profession. The reconciliation between them, when it finally comes in one of the show's most beloved episodes, is genuine and affecting, and has the specific emotional texture of a relationship between a parent and an adult child, where both people have been carrying something for too long and have finally found a way to set it down. But the reconciliation does not resolve everything, because reconciliation between a parent and child rarely resolves everything. It resolves the specific thing that needed resolving: the estrangement, the shame, the silence, and it creates the possibility of something better going forward. The weight of what came before does not simply disappear because the estrangement ended. Krusty's relationship with his profession is the show's most sustained examination of the gap between public performance and private experience. He drinks. He gambles. He makes decisions that are clearly not good for him or for the people around him. And then he goes in front of the cameras and he performs Krusty the Clown with what appears to be complete ease, and the children watching at home, including Bart, see a man who is entirely himself, entirely comfortable, entirely in his element. The performance is so complete that it hides the person. The clown is so convincing that the man disappears inside it. Springfield has accepted this. Springfield has never, as a community, required Krusty to be anything other than what he is on screen. The children who watch him do not need to know about the gambling or the drinking or the estrangement from his father or the private life that is considerably messier than the studio lights suggest. They need Krusty to be Krusty. And Krusty, to his credit and to his cost, has been Krusty for as long as the show has required him to be. There is a Krusty detail that the show drops and never quite develops that is worth sitting with. In the episode where Sideshow Bob frames Krusty for armed robbery, it is revealed that Krusty is actually illiterate. He cannot read. This is presented as a comedic revelation. The children's television star who reads to children on screen cannot actually read, and the show uses it for some good jokes and then moves on. But if you hold it for a moment longer, what it suggests about Krusty's life and Krusty's experience is quite striking. Krusty has spent his entire adult life as a public figure in an industry built on words, on scripts, on cue cards, on contracts, on the legal and commercial apparatus of show business while being unable to read any of it. He has navigated this through performance and intuition and the help of people around him who may or may not have always had his best interests at heart. He has been, in a very specific way, vulnerable to exploitation in a context where he was also the most visible person in the room. The illiteracy is not just a comic detail. It is, if you look at it in the context of everything else the show tells us about Krusty, a piece of the portrait of a person who has been getting by his whole life through the particular kind of resilience that belongs to people who have never been able to rely on the systems that other people use. Krusty will still be on air in Springfield when everything else has changed. His show is Springfield's longest-running children's programming. He is, in his way, as permanent a fixture as the power plant, another institution that is more complex than it appears, that serves a function the town depends on, that is operated by someone whose private experience of running it is at considerable remove from the public face it presents. The grease paint is always on. The show goes on. The children watch. And behind the camera, somewhere in the green room or the casino or the bar, Herschel Kristofsky is doing whatever Herschel Kristofsky does when nobody needs him to be a clown. The show has never quite told us what that is, and perhaps that is the right choice. Some things about Springfield are more honest left unlit. Springfield has a complicated relationship with its own fictionality. Most of the time, the show operates within its own world. The characters do not know they are on television, do not know they are animated, do not know that any of what they experience is the product of a writer's room, and a production team, and a studio that has been making decisions about their lives for 36 years. They simply live in Springfield, doing Springfield things, in the Springfield way. And then occasionally, something happens that cracks the frame. Not the full self-aware shattering of the fourth wall that some comedies use as their primary mode. The show does not usually operate in that register, and when it does, it is clearly marked as something unusual, a holiday episode or a special or a segment that announces itself as deliberately different from the show's normal mode. What happens instead is quieter and stranger. A moment or a line or a visual detail that suggests that somewhere just outside Springfield's frame there is something watching, and that something may occasionally be visible to the people inside the frame even if they cannot quite describe what they are seeing. The most famous example is also the most deliberate. In the episode Behind the Laughter, the show produced a full mockumentary about the Simpsons family, not the fictional Simpsons family of Springfield, but the suggestion of the Simpsons family as a real family who had agreed to have their lives turned into a television show. The episode is framed as a VH1 behind the music-style documentary, complete with talking head interviews, dramatic recreations, and the familiar arc of the rise, the crisis, and the attempted redemption. It is a brilliant and funny episode. It is also, if you let it be, slightly disturbing, because what the episode does underneath the comedy is suggest that the characters are aware of being watched, that Homer knows he is on television and has feelings about it, that Marge has experienced the show's production as something that happened to her rather than something she chose, that the gap between who these characters are on screen and who they are off screen, between the performance of The Simpsons and the people performing it, is a gap that contains things that neither the show nor the family within the show has ever fully examined. The episode is explicitly framed as a joke. It is not asking to be taken as a genuine statement about the nature of the show's characters. And yet it is there, in the canon, a full episode that treats the Simpsons family as people who are aware of their own fictionality and have complicated feelings about what that means. There are smaller versions of this throughout the show's history. Moments where a character says something that seems to acknowledge the show's own conventions, a comment about episodic structure, a joke about the reset button, an observation about the fact that certain things in Springfield never change. These moments are almost always played as jokes, and they are funny as jokes, and the show moves on from them quickly enough that they do not accumulate into something more systematic. But they are there. And taken together, they suggest that the show has been having a quiet, ongoing conversation with itself about what it is and what it is doing. A conversation that takes place in the margins and the asides, and the jokes that gesture toward the show's own production, never fully in the center, never fully acknowledged, always wrapped in comedy before it can become something more uncomfortable. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the most sustained version of this conversation. They are, as we discussed earlier, explicitly non-canonical. The show tells you up front that what you are about to see is not part of the regular Springfield reality, that the characters can die and the rules can be broken, and the horror can be fully expressed because none of it will persist past the end of the episode. The frame is different, the rules are different, and yet the Treehouse episodes often contain the show's most pointed observations about its own nature, the things that can only be said when the frame has been explicitly marked as exceptional. One of the most striking examples is the episode in which the Simpsons world is depicted as being literally two-dimensional, flat, hand-drawn, a surface rather than a space, and Homer briefly escapes into the three-dimensional world of early computer graphics. The episode is funny, and it is a technical showpiece, and it is also, if you squint at it sideways, a meditation on the nature of animated existence, on what it would mean to suddenly become real in a different sense than you have always been real, on the specific horror of dimensional dislocation. Homer in the three-dimensional world is frightened and confused and eventually finds his way back, and everything resets and Springfield continues. But the episode has shown something for a few minutes, the gap between the world the characters inhabit and the world the audience inhabits, made briefly visible through the device of literal dimensional difference. The show held up a mirror that reflected both directions at once, and then it put the mirror down and made a joke and moved on. The show is very good at putting mirrors down. There is also the matter of the show's internal self-reference, which has accumulated across 36 years into something more substantial than most people notice. The Simpsons has referenced itself, has made jokes about its own longevity, its own quality debates, its own cultural position with increasing frequency in its later seasons. These references are often meta in a comfortable, familiar way, the kind of self-deprecating humor that a long-running institution develops when it has become confident enough in its own position to make jokes about that position without feeling threatened by them. But some of the self-references are stranger than that. Some of them seem to be the show genuinely grappling with what it means to have been running for this long, to have accumulated this much, to have become something so woven into the culture that its own continued existence is a fact that requires acknowledgement. The jokes about nobody aging, the jokes about the reset button, the jokes about the floating timeline. These are jokes that can only be made by a show that is aware of what it is doing, and that awareness, even wrapped in comedy, even made safe by being treated as humor, is a form of the show looking directly at itself and deciding, each time, to keep going anyway. The show looks at itself, it always has, and what it sees, when it looks the impossibility of the timeline, the accumulated weight of the mysteries, the gap between the lives the characters should have lived and the lives they are perpetually living, it frames as comedy, because comedy is the frame that Springfield knows best, and because comedy allows you to look at difficult things without having to resolve them. The fourth wall in Springfield is not broken. It is permanently, softly, just slightly permeable. Things pass through it in both directions. The show's awareness of its own nature, the audience's love for what the show is, the quiet understanding between the people who make Springfield and the people who live in it, in the sense of returning to it week after week, that this is a shared project, and that the project has lasted longer than anyone quite expected, and that the length itself has become part of what it means. 36 years of a slightly permeable fourth wall. 36 years of the show knowing what it is and deciding to keep being it, and the audience knowing what it is and deciding to keep coming back to it. That is not a plot hole. That is, possibly, the The most impressive thing about Springfield that it has sustained this long on the basis of a mutual agreement between makers and watchers that what they have here is worth preserving, even in its impossibility, even with its floating timeline and its unanswered questions and its yellow skin and its three-eyed fish. Even with all of that, they have all decided to keep coming back. And here you are, keeping the agreement. Television is a visual medium, but The Simpsons is also, in a way that is easy to forget when you are thinking about its visual impossibilities and narrative plot holes, a deeply sonic experience. The show's sound design, the specific texture of its voice performances, its music, its incidental sound effects, is as much a part of what Springfield is as anything you can see on screen. Danny Elfman's main theme is among the most recognizable pieces of television music ever composed. It arrives at the beginning of every episode, played over the sequence of images that establish Springfield's geography and introduce the family in their various occupations before they converge on the couch. The theme is bright and slightly manic, and contains within its melody something that is at once celebratory and slightly unstable. There is a quality to it that suggests joy with a slight edge, the feeling of something moving very fast that might not be entirely in control of where it is going. This is exactly the right music for Springfield. The theme has remained recognizable across 36 years of couch gags and changed cultural contexts and evolving animation styles. When you hear it, you know immediately where you are. The sonic cue for Springfield is so deeply embedded that it triggers something Pavlovian, a sense of arrival, of having come home to a specific place that you know well, before a single image has resolved on screen. The voice performances are another layer of Springfield's sonic identity that is easy to take for granted because you have been hearing them for so long. Dan Castellaneta's Homer, Julie Kavner's Marge, Nancy Cartwright's Bart, Yeardley Smith's Lisa, Harry Shearer's Burns and Skinner and Ned, these voices have become so completely identified with their characters that it is almost impossible to imagine the characters speaking in any other way. The voices are not simply performances. They are, by now, the characters themselves. The character does not exist independently of the sound of the voice. They are the same thing. What this means for the plot holes we have been exploring is interesting. The accumulated weight of 36 years of these specific voices speaking these specific lines has created a kind of sonic architecture for Springfield that is as real and as persistent as anything in its visual world. Homer's voice, doing Homer's laugh, the specific, helpless, genuine quality of it, the laugh that sounds like a person who has been surprised by their own amusement, is one of the most recognizable sounds in American culture. It carries meaning that goes far beyond the specific context of any individual episode. When you hear Homer laugh, you hear everything Homer has ever laughed at, the accumulated history of a character delivered in a single sound. The show's incidental music, the score that runs beneath scenes to cue emotional register and transition between tones, is another element that the show has developed with care and consistency across its run. Alf Clausen scored the show for nearly 3 decades, creating a musical world for Springfield that was as specific and recognizable as the visual world. The music knew when to be funny and when to step back and let something real happen. And the calibration of that relationship, the music deciding not to undercut the emotional moments with comedy, the music supporting the comedy without overwhelming it, is part of what has allowed the show to operate in multiple emotional registers simultaneously without losing coherence. The specific sound of Springfield, the theme, the voices, the incidental score, the particular quality of the audio mix, is part of what makes Springfield feel like a place rather than simply a show. It is part of what makes it possible to close your eyes in the state you are in right now and still be in Springfield, still know exactly where you are, still feel the warmth of that familiar sonic environment wrapping around you, like the particular comfort of a place you have always known. The sound is the thing that travels through the dark. When the screen is black or your eyes are closed or you are drifting in the soft space between waking and sleep, the sound of Springfield continues. Homer's voice. Marge's voice. The theme coming around again at the start of another episode. These things persist in the dark, and they are enough. They are, in their way, the most essential part of what Springfield is. Because Springfield has always been, at its most fundamental level, about the sound of a family. The specific sounds that a family makes in a house, the voices, the arguments, the laughter, the television in the background, the particular quality of the noise of people who know each other very well living in the same space. The show has captured this with an accuracy that its visual impossibilities should not be able to sustain but somehow do, because the sound underneath the images is true even when the images themselves are yellow and four-fingered and operating on floating timelines. The sound of Springfield is the sound of family. It has always been, and family sounds like home. Let it sound like home tonight. Let the theme play one more time in whatever part of your mind still holds music. Let Homer's voice do what it always does, be surprised, be delighted, be exactly as Homer has always been. Let the house on Evergreen Terrace fill with the sound of people who love each other in the complicated and genuine way that the best families manage, through all the plot holes and the unanswered questions, and the 36 years of impossible, unchanging afternoon. The sound of Springfield is still there when everything else in the world has gone quiet. That is enough. That has always been enough. There is a light in Springfield at night. Not the glow from the power plant's cooling towers, though that is there too, a soft and slightly unsettling luminescence that has been visible on the Springfield skyline since the show's earliest seasons. This is a different kind of light. The kind that comes from inside houses when the people in them are still awake, when there is still movement and conversation and the ordinary domestic warmth of a family going about the evening business of being a family. The light from the Simpsons house on Evergreen Terrace, seen from the street at night, is specific and recognizable. There is a blue flicker from the television in the living room, where Homer is almost certainly on the couch, where the family has probably been for at least part of the evening, where the couch gag that opens every episode gets enacted in some variation, week after week, because Springfield requires it. The kitchen light is on, because Marge is somewhere in the house doing something productive, because Marge is always somewhere in the house doing something productive. There are lights in the children's bedrooms, Lisa's, probably, because Lisa reads and practices and thinks long past a reasonable hour, driven by the particular energy of a mind that does not know how to simply stop. Bart's, more uncertainly, because Bart's evenings are his own in ways that the house does not always fully track. Maggie's room is the quiet one. Maggie's room, at night, has the particular quality of a place where something is very still but not quite absent, where the presence is there but folded down to its smallest possible expression. The crib, the mobile, the faint suggestion of a pacifier sound that might be breath, or might be something more considered than breath, from a baby who has been watching everything for 36 years and has still not decided that the time to speak is now. From the street, the house on Evergreen Terrace looks like any house. It looks like the house that is in your memory when you think about what a house is supposed to look like, the one that the word house conjures when you are asked to picture a house without specifying. 2 stories, a lawn that is approximately maintained, a car in the driveway, windows lit from inside. This could be anywhere. This house could be on any street in any American town that has ever existed. This is the point. This has always been the point. Springfield is universal, not despite its impossibilities, but partly because of them. Because the impossibilities wrapped around something so recognizable, so completely familiar, that the wrapping eventually becomes irrelevant. The yellow skin and the 4 fingers, and the floating timeline, and the power plant's radiation and the 3-eyed fish, all of it is the particular strangeness of Springfield specifically, the local color of a place that is also everywhere. And underneath all of it, inside all of it, at the center of it, the house, the family, the light in the window. Every town has a house like this. Not literally like this, not yellow, not 4-fingered, not radiation adjacent, but a house where the television is on and the family is in it and the light is visible from the street and the sight of it is enough, from a certain angle, to produce in you something that is not quite feeling and not quite thought but somewhere in the warm space between them. Springfield's house is that house made universal, made into a form that can be returned to indefinitely, that never changes in the ways that would make it unfamiliar, that is always exactly where you left it when you come back to it. The blue flicker of the television, the kitchen light, the quiet in Maggie's room, the particular light of a family that has been there for 36 years and will be there, in some form, for as long as people want to come back to it. The plot holes are real, the impossibilities are real, the questions that have never been answered and will probably never be answered are real. And none of them changes what that light means when you see it from the street at night, in the particular state of mind you are in right now. Somewhere between waking and sleeping, somewhere between the world you actually live in and the world that exists inside the television and inside your memory and inside the soft accumulation of everything Springfield has ever been to you. The light is on. The family is home. The town is exactly what it always is. That is Springfield. That is the whole of it. When you strip away the theories and the mysteries and the 36 years of accumulated questions, the light in the window, the family inside, the sound of Homer laughing at something on the television, surprised again, delighted again, exactly as he has always been and exactly as he will always be. Every long-running piece of fiction accumulates a shadow, a body of things that are almost said, almost shown, almost acknowledged things the work circles around without ever landing on directly, because landing on them directly would change the nature of the work in ways that the work has decided it cannot afford. The Simpsons has one of the largest and most interesting shadows of any show in television history, for the simple reason that it has been circling for 36 years, and the things in its shadow have had 36 years to deepen and expand. The show has almost said many times that Homer is not okay. Not in the comedic sense of Homer being a disaster who is fine anyway, that is the surface version, the one the show presents as the primary text. In the deeper version, the one that surfaces in certain episodes and certain moments and certain looks that Homer gives the camera or the horizon or nothing in particular, Homer is a man who has been carrying things for a very long time and who has not been given, by his environment or his circumstances or his own cognitive limitations, the tools to put them down. The grief for his mother, the weight of knowing, somewhere below the level of full conscious thought, that the man who signs his paychecks is the man who destroyed his family. The specific sadness of a person who had the capacity for something more and whose environment conspired, through radiation and crayon and institutional design, to ensure that the capacity was never fully realized. The show gives Homer moments of genuine clarity, brief ones usually. The episode where the crayon is removed and Homer briefly becomes who he might have been, that episode shows you the grief of the other version, the man who could have existed in different circumstances, looking at his actual life and finding it genuinely painful to see clearly. Homer chooses to put the crayon back, and the choice is played as comedy, as Homer being Homer, as the reset completing itself. But the choice is also a genuine and devastating thing that the show almost says directly and then retreats from, because saying it directly would require a kind of sustained engagement with Homer's tragedy that the comedic register cannot sustain. The show has almost said many times that Lisa is going to leave Springfield and never come back. The flash-forward episodes give her a future that is set somewhere else, that involves becoming a person shaped by her intelligence and her values rather than crushed by the community that could not accommodate them. These episodes are loving and detailed, and suggest that the writers know exactly who Lisa becomes if time is allowed to pass a specific and recognizable adult who grew out of everything the show has established about her. And then the flash-forward ends and Lisa is 8 again and Springfield has not changed, and the future that was visible for an episode is sealed back behind the wall of the floating timeline. But the show has shown it. It knows. Somewhere in the writer's room, across decades of production, people have imagined in full detail the life Lisa Simpson would have if her story were allowed to complete itself. They have written versions of it. They have shown versions of it. And then they have returned her to the present, because the present is what the show requires. But the knowledge of the future is there, in the shadow, visible in the way Lisa is written as someone who is not quite finished, who is in the middle of becoming something, whose 8-year-old present is always transparently a starting point rather than a destination. The show has almost said many times that the power plant is going to kill Springfield. Not metaphorically, not theoretically, but actually and permanently. The accumulated evidence for the environmental damage the plant has caused is, as we have explored at length tonight, significant and consistent. And on several occasions the show has brought this to a point where the reckoning seems imminent, where the contamination is visible enough, the oversight close enough, the evidence documented enough that the next step seems like it must be accountability. And then the step does not come. The contamination continues. Burns maintains the monopoly. The fish keeps its 3 eyes. And Springfield keeps drinking the water. The show knows what the power plant is. It has always known. And it has chosen, episode after episode, year after year, to show you the evidence without delivering the verdict, because delivering the verdict would require a version of Springfield that has faced its own darkness directly and been changed by it. A Springfield that has faced its darkness directly is a different Springfield, perhaps a better one in some ways, certainly a more honest one, but also a Springfield that has lost the particular comfort of its own denial. The denial is part of what Springfield is. Taking it away would take away something that the show and its audience depends on. So the verdict does not come. The evidence sits in the record. The water is still contaminated. And Springfield goes on, choosing comfort over clarity, as it has always chosen, as perhaps all communities must sometimes choose if they are to continue being communities at all. The show has almost said, more times than any other almost saying, that time is passing, that the characters should be older, that Bart should be in his 40s, that Lisa should have a career and an apartment somewhere, that Maggie should have learned to walk and talk decades ago, and should by now be a person with a history rather than a permanent infant. The show has almost said that the floating timeline is not just a production convention, but a kind of violence, a form of stasis that denies the characters the completion that living things are supposed to arrive at. But the show cannot quite say this, because saying it would require ending. And the show has not ended, and does not appear to be ending, and the decision to continue is a decision that forecloses the honest acknowledgement of the floating timeline's cost. The characters cannot age because the show continues. The show continues because the characters cannot age. It is a loop, as we said much earlier tonight, and it is a loop that the show has been honest about in flashes and glances and moments of self-awareness, while never being quite honest enough to break it. The shadow of Springfield is full of things like these. Things the show has almost said, almost shown, almost committed to. The almost saying is part of what makes the show worth the kind of attention we have been paying it tonight. The kind of attention that looks for what is in the shadow as well as what is in the light, that treats the gaps and the silences and the unanswered questions as meaningful rather than simply absent. Springfield's silences have always been meaningful. The things it does not say are as carefully chosen as the things it does say. The plot holes are not oversights. They are the shape of the shadow, the outline of everything the show knows and has chosen not to fully speak. For the sake of the comedy, for the sake of the warmth, for the sake of keeping Springfield exactly what it has always been. A town that knows a great deal and says just enough. That shows you the evidence and withholds the verdict. That tells you a story about a family that is, underneath all its impossibilities, the truest story it knows how to tell. And that keeps telling it, episode after episode, year after year, not because it has not found the ending, but because it has decided that the ending is not the point. The point is the telling. The point is the family. The point is the light in the window on Evergreen Terrace, and the sound of Homer's laugh, and Lisa's saxophone, and Bart's skateboard on the concrete, and Marge's voice saying something patient and true, and Maggie's silence, watchful and ready, behind the pacifier. That is what Springfield almost says every episode and gets closer to saying every year, and will perhaps never quite say directly, because saying it directly would require a kind of stillness that Springfield cannot quite achieve, because Springfield is always moving, always resetting, always finding its way back to the couch and the television and the family and the beginning of another episode, another loop, another chance to almost say the thing it has been almost saying for 36 years. Almost, almost, almost. And somehow that almost is enough. Somehow the reaching toward the thing, the circling of it, the showing of its outline without committing to its center, is enough to fill 36 years of episodes and keep an audience coming back. Enough to produce the feeling, in a person watching late at night in the soft state between waking and sleeping, that something real is being communicated. Something true. Something worth staying up for, worth settling in for, worth letting wash over you in the particular way that this kind of story, told in this particular tone, at this particular pace, washes over you when the lights are low and the rest of the world is quiet. Springfield almost says it. And you almost hear it. And in the space between the almost saying and the almost hearing, something happens that is not quite speech and not quite silence, but something in between, something warm and familiar and entirely specific to this town, this family, this show that has been running since before most of its audience was born, and will probably be running long after all of us have stopped watching. The almost is Springfield's gift. The reaching without arriving, the circling without landing, the evidence without the verdict, the mystery without the solution, and in the quietest moments, in the space between one episode and the next, in the soft dark where Springfield exists when no one is watching, maybe that is enough. Maybe the almost is the whole point. Maybe Springfield has been saying it all along, and the saying is just Very, very quiet. Listen, there it is. There is a version of Springfield that exists between episodes. In the gaps between one story and the next, between the end of one week's couch gag and the beginning of the next, Springfield continues. The show does not depict this. The show has no interest in the between times, because the between times are not where the plots happen, not where the jokes live, not where the specific comedic and emotional machinery of The Simpsons operates. The between times are just time. And Springfield, as we have established at length tonight, has a complicated relationship with time. But imagine it anyway, if you would, in the slow and drifting way that this particular hour of the night encourages. Imagine Springfield in the hours after the episode ends, when the credits have rolled and the couch gag has resolved and the story has reached whatever approximate resolution it was going to reach. What does Springfield look like when it is not being watched? The power plant runs through the night. Burns' facility does not sleep. The cooling towers continue their slow exhalation of steam into the Springfield sky. The river that runs past the plant receives whatever the plant gives the river, as it has every night since the plant began operating, decades ago, before Homer was born, before Springfield was quite the town it is now. The water moves through the dark. The fish swim in it. Blinky. If Blinky is still there, and why would Blinky not be there? Given that nothing in Springfield seems to stop existing simply because the plot has moved on, Blinky moves through the dark water with his three eyes open, seeing something in the river at night that the rest of Springfield is not awake to see. Moe's Tavern closes at some point. This is technically true of all bars. That they close, that there is a last customer and a last drink, and a moment when Moe wipes down the bar and turns off the lights and stands for a moment in the dark of his own establishment before going wherever Moe goes when the bar is closed. The show has never quite depicted where Moe goes when the bar is closed. The bar is Moe's entire context. He exists within it the way certain people exist within their work, not because there is nothing outside the work, but because the work is so completely the shape of their daily experience that the outside of it feels theoretical. Moe, alone in his dark bar after closing, is a figure the show has gestured toward in certain episodes and certain moments, without ever fully committing to. There is a Moe who is genuinely lonely in the specific and aching way that loneliness operates when it has been present for a very long time. This Moe is real within the show's world. He has appeared briefly, in the cracks between the comedy, with enough consistency to be undeniable. And then the comedy reasserts itself, because the comedy is the show's primary register, and Moe goes back to being Moe the bartender rather than Moe the person. But in the between times, in the hours after the episode, in the dark of the closed bar, Moe the person is there, sitting with whatever Moe sits with, in the quiet that the bar does not have when it is full of Springfield's residents processing their various crises over cheap beer and Moe's particular brand of sympathetic company. The quiet of Moe's Tavern after closing is probably one of the quieter places in Springfield. It has absorbed a great deal of human noise over the years. Whatever that absorption has deposited in the walls and the furniture and the air of the place, it is there, in the between times, and Moe is in it. The school is empty. Springfield Elementary, between episodes, between school days, exists as institutions exist when they are not in use as the structure of the thing rather than the thing itself. The desks that miss us, Krabappel used to stand in front of, that the rotating cast of Springfield Elementary teachers now stands in front of, are just desks in an empty room at night. The chalkboard has whatever was written on it last. The hallways have whatever residual trace of the day is left in them. The smell of chalk dust and institutional cleaning products, and the particular atmosphere of a place where children spend the hours between home and home, doing the work of becoming people. Bart's desk has his name carved into it. This is the kind of detail that the show has established, and that persists across episodes as one of the givens of Springfield Elementary. Bart has always been in this school, in this desk, and the desk bears the marks of his passage, the way real school furniture bears the marks of all the students who have sat in it. Bart will sit in this desk again when the next episode begins. He will be 10 years old. He will be exactly who he has always been. And the desk will be there, bearing its carved name, a small permanent record of a boy who has been 10 for 36 years and counting. Ned Flanders is probably asleep at a reasonable hour. Ned has always struck me as someone who maintains a consistent and healthy sleep schedule, because Ned maintains consistent and healthy versions of all the ordinary disciplines of life. His house is next to the Simpson house. From the street, at the right time of night, Both houses are dark, the Simpson house's television having finally gone quiet, Homer having fallen asleep on the couch or been encouraged toward bed, the kitchen light having been turned off by Marge at whatever hour Marge goes to bed, which is probably after everyone else and before anyone would consider reasonable. Two houses, side by side, dark in the Springfield night. The gap between them, the gap between the family that does everything wrong and the family that does everything right, between Homer's chaotic generosity and Ned's programmed virtue, between the house that is always slightly in crisis and the house that is always slightly too composed, that gap is still there in the dark. It does not close when the lights go out. It does not require witnesses to exist. It is simply there. The distance between two ways of being a person and a neighbor and a member of a community, two ways that the show has been placing in proximity for 36 years, to see what they illuminate in each other. In the dark, they are just two houses, equally still, equally quiet. Whatever difference the daylight makes between them, the difference the show spends its episodes examining and commodifying and occasionally touching with something more serious, is invisible at this hour. They are just houses, just families, just people asleep in the Springfield night, dreaming whatever people in Springfield dream. What does Homer dream? The show has depicted Homer's dreams on various occasions, in various registers. Sometimes they are straightforwardly wish fulfillment dreams, food, comfort, the particular pleasures that Homer's waking life also provides, but that the dream makes more complete and more reliable. Sometimes they are stranger than that, shaped by the show's own dream logic, following the associative and non-linear paths that dream narratives follow when they are doing something more interesting than simple wish fulfillment. But in the between times, in the genuine sleeping hours of the Springfield night, what does Homer dream? The coma theory suggests that this is the wrong question, that Homer's entire post-1993 experience is itself a dream, that the sleeping and the waking are the same state, the same continuous generative process of an unconscious mind, producing its most urgent desire over and over. If the coma theory is right, then Homer's dreams within the dream are nested structures, impossible to distinguish from the primary fiction, one layer of imagination inside another, inside another. The radiation theory suggests that Homer's dreams are shaped by whatever the years of exposure have done to his neurological function, that his brain's dream production, like all the other things his brain does, operates in a state that has been altered by the environment in ways that make it different from what it would have been in a brain that had not been living in Springfield all this time. Neither theory is provable. Neither theory is falsifiable within the world of the show. They are simply the best available frameworks for thinking about what the sleeping Homer, in the quiet of the Springfield night, in the dark house on Evergreen Terrace, is doing with the hours the show does not show us. Maybe he is dreaming about Marge, about the specific comfort of the specific person he has chosen and who has chosen him, the way that certain dreams return again and again to the safest thing, the most reliable anchor, the one constant in a life that has had many constants but only one that matters in quite this way. Marge in the dream, young and exactly as she is now because Springfield does not permit aging even in its dreams, saying something patient and true and slightly exasperated in the particular voice that is the voice of the person Homer loves best. That is probably what Homer dreams. In the between times, in the dark, with the house quiet and the plant running in the distance, and the river moving past Blinky in the dark water, and Ned asleep next door in the house where everything is always slightly too composed, and Maggie in her room, watching, even in sleep perhaps still watching, because Maggie is always watching. Springfield at night. The hours nobody talks about. The town in its between time, dark and warm and full of the accumulated weight of 36 years of stories and families and jokes that outlived their explanation and questions that were never answered and love that was never in doubt. This is Springfield. The whole of it, in the dark. The light in the window is off now. The family is asleep. The town is exactly what it has always been, carrying forward into tomorrow exactly the same mysteries it carried into tonight, unchanged and unresolved and quietly, completely, entirely itself. Good night.